Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, people who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you. We're reading today from Justin Frank, Dr. Justin Frank's book, Trump on the Couch, Inside the Mind of the President. He's the guy who wrote Bush on the Couch and Obama on the Couch. He's a psychiatrist and professor of psychiatry in Georgetown in Washington, D.C. And the book just came out. This is from the introduction. There's no question that Trump is mentally unfit in ways that make him psychologically unsuited for the presidency. That in itself is a truly alarming turn of events. And I'd write the entire book in all caps if I thought that would better convey the sense of urgency with which it is written and should be read. Any number of troubling mental illness diagnoses and character evaluations can be and have been accurately applied to Trump. Both can vary from analyst to analyst, however, without necessarily sacrificing any of the accuracy. More to the point, the true value of a diagnosis is to determine an appropriate course of treatment, and there's no indication that any sort of treatment is a viable option. Trump on the Couch then seeks not simply to make the case that Trump is not well, but rather to show how he is unwell in ways that would have been of particular interest to the applied psychoanalysts whose investigation likely preceded our own, the Russians, and perhaps even their American allies or counterparts, who in the long tradition of intelligence gathering examined Trump's psyche and found an opportunity for exploitation. Trump's presidency caps a lifetime of dysfunction and disorder that is not likely to be healed while he is in office, just as Trump's ascendancy among voters gives expression to long-standing trends in the American electorate's psyche that are not going to be easily addressed. However, if we can identify certain aspects of these disorders and trends that may have contributed to Trump and his voters fusing into a shared belief system, then we have a better chance of fostering the kind of honest cultural discussion that will be necessary in order to contain and repair the damage that has already been done. Understanding Trump calls for a consideration of his psychodynamics almost certainly more rigorous than he has ever embarked upon on his own. Trump dismissed psychotherapy as a crutch in his 2004 Playboy interview. Years later, talking to biographer Michael D'Antonio, he described in greater detail a generalized aversion to introspection beyond the therapeutic setting. Quote, "I don't like to analyze myself because I might not like what I see," he told D'Antonio. "I don't like to analyze myself. I don't like to think too much about the past." End of quote. Even armed with a detailed family history, we can't capture Trump in action with only the tools of applied psychoanalysis. Like some of the most disturbed patients I've worked with, Trump is so erratic, constantly changing the topic, elevating the stakes, and raising the volume, that one doesn't know what to expect from him next. It's hard to imagine him in treatment, even as the subject of an applied psychoanalytical investigation. He behaves like a patient who is simultaneously banging in a consulting room window, rattling on its door, ringing the phone, and texting or tweeting his demands for attention. Trump presents so many troubling affects that it's hard to remember them all. In the final weeks of the first year of Trump's presidency, Michael Wolff and David K. Johnston published accounts of the Trump White House that present a president with a startling number of disturbing characteristics. Any one of these demonstrable and suspected traits would raise calls for a psychoanalytic investigation if it was done on a layperson. In a president, in aggregate, they are truly cause for alarm. The list of worrisome, evident, and alleged attributes that emerge in these and other portraits is long. Narcissist, liar, racist, sexist, adulterer, baby, hypocrite, chiseler, tax cheat, outlaw, psychopath, paranoid, fraud, ignorant, vengeful, delusional, arrogant, greedy, contemptuous, unsympathetic, learning disabled, cruel, obstructor of justice, threat to the Constitution, traitor. The list is so long that it can be overwhelming. It's a challenge to remember the beginning by the time you make it to the end. There are times when I wish someone would help us remember all the troubling aspects of Trump's character and behavior, past and present, in a way that would encourage recognition of the totality of his pathology, rather than its component parts, which individually cause alarm before being temporarily forgotten when the next emergency presents itself. As an applied psychoanalyst, my task is not only to appreciate the full list, but also to ignore the big picture and focus on a single pathology at a time. Practitioners of applied psychoanalysis approach their subject as both theoretician and clinician. The theoretician endeavors to piece things together, to figure things out, while the clinician tries to approach each session capable of being surprised, as if his mind were a blank slate. The analysis in the following pages aspires to accomplish both goals: reviewing Trump's record with a clinician's eye, preparing to be surprised by the unexpected observation, and assembling these findings into a more comprehensive portrait. The image of hypothetical patient Trump rattling the consulting room door and banging on the window reminds us that President Trump doesn't want us to see the entire list at once. Not only that, but patients I've treated who are reminiscent of Trump cannot tolerate being inside the consulting room either. They leave my office whenever they feel unable to think their way through an anxiety-provoking interpretation, much the way Trump leaves press briefings when the questions get too close. Trump.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. A lot in the news today. Obviously, the bombings are at the very top, and I'm going to go off on an extended rant about this in our second hour today. I am hearing, whatever the appropriate sensory metaphor is, the echoes of Kristallnacht, and I'll tell you all about that. Greg Palast is going to be with us in about 25-30 minutes here at the bottom of the hour. The Republican Party has literally been caught warning donors about voting while black. And in our third hour, we have some just astonishing reporting being done by ProPublica on how Donald Trump and Ivanka Trump and Don Jr., the three of them, have been, fronting since the last Trump bankruptcy for Trump properties around the world and engaging in fraud. I mean, just outright, literally lying to people. Just outright fraud. No other way to describe it. And they nail it over and over and over again. And like I said, we'll get into this in our third hour and have, a lengthy conversation about it. And in fact, Francis Causey, also, who wrote The Long Shadow, or who produced the movie The Long Shadow, is going to be with us in our second hour, talking about the whole Kristallnacht thing. So there's just a lot going on. To start out, we've got the latest is that Robert De Niro got one of these pipe bombs. The Obamas, of course, the Clintons, Joe Biden, Eric Holder, Maxine Waters, John Brennan, George Soros. And like I said, we're going to get into that in a lot of detail in about an hour from now. But I just wanted to let you know that that's still, the principal story that everybody's talking about. There are a lot of other things that are also going on in the world. Gina Haspel, remember when she was being confirmed to be the director of the CIA, and there were people like me who were saying, no, wait a minute, this woman oversaw torture when she was the CIA station chief or whatever her specific job was in either Afghanistan or Iraq. And, but she, Trump prevailed, and she's now running the CIA. And it turns out that on Monday, she flew to Turkey. And on Tuesday, the Turkish Secret Service played for her the tape of Khashoggi. Apparently, the way it played out, as soon as he walked in, they seized him. They stripped him naked so that a body double could walk out the back door wearing his clothes and walk around Istanbul or whatever, Ankara, whatever town this was in Turkey. Walk around for a few hours and be spotted by various surveillance cameras so they could they could credibly argue that Khashoggi had actually walked out the back door of the embassy. See, here he is, an hour later, walking down the streets of, in this town in Turkey. Apparently, after they stripped him and gave his clothes to the body double, they then cut off his fingers one at a time as a way of torturing him and informing him about how angry they were. Apparently, they then tourniqueted his arms and legs and sawed them off. And by that point, he died. The whole thing took 10, 15 minutes. And Gina Haspel heard this. Now, she obviously, supervising the torture of people by the United States in Afghanistan or Iraq probably does not have a particularly squeamish stomach. And my apologies if I just caused yours to turn over, but we really need to look at this kind of evil face on if we're going to be able to do anything about it. And so what's going to be particularly interesting to me, and I realize the bombings, the news media, at least the cable news media, have gone full terror porn, all porn all the time. And it just, for many of us, we just reach a point of saturation with, okay, I got the story. What else is going on in the world? And there's a lot going on in the world. And I'm hoping that when Gina Haspel briefs Trump on this, which apparently is going to happen today, that something comes out of this. Meanwhile, Brian Kemp, and as I said, we're going to be talking with Greg Palast about this in about 25 minutes. Brian Kemp has come out and said, well, this was actually in a private campaign event, so he didn't come out and say, he simply said to a group of Republican donors, this was leaked on Tuesday by Rolling Stone, day before yesterday. He said that he was, well, here's the quote. He was talking about how Abrams is, quote, putting a lot of resources behind the get out the vote effort. And he said, this is something that concerns us, especially if everybody uses and exercises their right to vote. Right. Brian Kemp, vote suppression chief in Georgia, the Secretary of State, who is also running for governor against Stacey Abrams, who, if she wins, will be the first African-American governor in the United States history, and I believe, certainly in Georgia history. And what's he doing? He's suppressing votes in black areas, in African-American communities, and in, and we're seeing, in fact, a federal court just stopped Gwinnett County, the most diverse county in Georgia, from purging, from throwing away actual ballots. People had actually voted, from throwing them away because some, presumably Republican election officials said, well, that signature doesn't quite match. In the first signature, they've got their middle initial. In the second signature, they spelled out their middle name. It doesn't match. We need to throw this away. Gwinnett County is 12% of the population of Georgia, and yet, as of about, I think it was last Thursday or Friday, I first reported this on this program, it accounted for 40% of all the ballots that had been thrown away, the early voting mail-in ballots. 40% of them. The Washington Post, Christopher Ingram, they did this really, really in-depth analysis of a new report that was published by political scientists at Northern Illinois University, Jacksonville University, and China's Wuhan University. Seriously. And they were looking at the 33 different kinds of laws, election laws, that we have in the United States in our 50 different states, because, the Constitution and tradition have given the individual states the rights to decide who votes and how they vote and under what circumstances they can vote and when they can vote and when they can't vote, with the exception of that, first Tuesday in November thing that's for the president. And these 33 different kinds of laws range from, on the one end, where I live here in Portland, Oregon, voters are registered automatically. Automatically. The state mails out ballots to voters weeks before the election. I got mine last Thursday. I voted Friday. I voted on Saturday, mailed it back. And you don't even have to show up. You know, it's all vote by mail. So there's no electronic machines or anything. So Oregon is the most compliant, or the most easy to vote state. And then the hardest to vote state is Mississippi, which doesn't allow early voting, doesn't allow absentee voting unless you can provide a doctor's slip. And it requires a very, very strict and narrow definition of photo ID at the polls. And what they found, this is, you know, just quoting from this report, the 5 most restrictive states had turnouts in 2016 that were, on average, nearly 9 percentage points lower than the turnout in the 5 states in which it was easiest to vote. So it accounts for a 9-point swing in voter participation. That's really substantial. And then they also said there are you know, some variables having to do with large states, small states, things like that. And if you just look at it, you know, as a mathematical construct, like, you know, what would these kind of laws do that suppress voting versus what would these kind of laws do that encourage voting? What they found out, again, I quote, overall, the model predicts an 11-point turnout difference between the least restrictive and most restrictive states in 2016. So you wonder why a minority of Americans voted for Republicans for the House of Representatives, but they control the House of Representatives. And that was like, you know, slightly less than half of Americans voted for Republicans for the House of Representatives, in the mid 40%. The percentage of Americans who voted for Republicans for the Senate was in the neighborhood of 20%. And yet Republicans control the Senate. The number of Americans who voted for Republican for the White House, for the presidency, was 3 million fewer than the number of Democrats. So more Democrats voted for Hillary Clinton than Donald Trump. More Democrats voted for U.S. senators than did Republicans. And more people voted for Democrats in the House of Representatives than voted for Republicans. And yet, the Republicans have so rigged the system over the last 30 years, and this has been a very well-funded, very well-organized effort, that the Republicans control the House, the Senate, the White House, and by virtue of that, they have installed their people in the United States Supreme Court. And now Donald Trump doubles down on this, and, you know, one of the most naked attempts at voter suppression literally ever in modern times. He tweets, all levels of government and law enforcement are carefully watching for voter fraud, including during early voting. Cheat at your own peril. Violators will be subject to maximum penalties, both civil and criminal. Yeah.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Meanwhile, the Republican Party in Montana says, oops, we mailed out this brochure to voters saying they could vote up to 10 days after the election. Our bad. And welcome back. It's remarkable, isn't it? Michael in Snohomish, Washington. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Yeah, I was wondering, in the upcoming congressional elections, how can we tell, you know, between how many people voted and how many votes were counted? Is there a way to tell, like, how many were thrown out?
You know, some states will report that. Most states won't. Some states do, however, report the numbers of provisional ballots and whether those provisional ballots are counted or not counted. We won't know that for, you know, probably weeks until weeks after the election. But the one thing that we will know the day of the election, if it's still being done, is the difference between the exit poll results and the actual vote count. And we'll have the actual vote count, of course, the night of the election. And typically the exit polls are published that night or the next morning. And so what we've seen historically, and I know several of the exit polling companies, Mitofsky Edison, for example. Well, Mitofsky and Edison used to be two separate companies, and then competed with exit poll, doing exit polls. And then when the numbers started diverging from reality in the 2002 election and the 2004 election, it became a crisis for these guys. And in 2004, all the media jumped in and they created this one single consortium that was ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, and I don't remember if Fox participated or not, and the Washington Post, the New York Times, and Edison Matovsky, okay? And they did the 2004 election, and I think they did the 2006 election. And again, there were, a handful of states where the numbers were really, really off. And in every single case, the numbers showed Democrats winning, but the votes, the exit poll numbers showed Democrats winning, but the votes showed Republicans winning. 100% of the time, in every single case, which is why they call this red shift, shifting toward the red, shifting toward the Republican Party. In some cases, it was 1%. In some cases, it was 3%. In some cases, it was as much as 7%. And at the time, many of us thought that that was indicating that in those states, electronic voting machines were being tampered with. But what we found is that this is happening regardless of whether people vote on electronic voting machines. It's happening in districts where there's a lot of paper ballots. It doesn't seem to, there's no difference in the red shift between people who vote on paper and people who vote electronically, broadly speaking. So then the question becomes, well, why the red shift? The only plausible explanation is that people were given provisional ballots, not explained to them that it would never be counted, thought that they had voted, told the exit poller that they had voted for the Democrat because they got a provisional ballot. They were probably minorities. And so the exit pollsters counted them, and of course the actual vote never counted them. So I think the way that we'll know, Michael, is by redshift. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
If I got time, since Donald Trump seems to have a cash register for a heart, do you think we could take up a collection and buy his presidency out from him? We don't
have enough money. I mean, that's what the Koch brothers have done. Initially they opposed him. They strongly opposed him. And then finally, when it was obvious that, he was the guy and he would put a right-winger on the Supreme Court and he would advance right-wing judges and all this other kind of stuff, when he started buying into their agenda, they poured all that money into the 2016 election in support of Republicans and a huge get-out-the-vote effort, all of which benefited Donald Trump. And, they're doing the same thing this time around. And you're getting these generic anti-democratic party ads and whatnot that are adding to Trump's cachet, as it were. So, Michael, spot on. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. It's 21 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. It's 21 minutes past the hour. So Michael was asking, is there some way that we can know to what extent Republican voter suppression was successful in this election? Is there some way that we can know on election night? And my answer is yes, there is. But it's going to depend on there being exit polling. And this is one of the things that I have not been able to find any reliable news source on. And if you know, give me a call, please. 202-808-9925. If you know if there's going to be exit polling in this election, and if so, where and by whom? Because it's exit polling that has traditionally pointed out to us how Republican voting suppression efforts, where and how successful they have been. The simple formula is very, very straightforward. The Republicans do everything they can to suppress the vote. The main thing that they do, however, is they knock people off the voting rolls. It's been, 14 million people have been knocked off the voting rolls by Republican secretaries of state and governors in the last year. 14 million, according to Greg Palast, who will be with us in 10 minutes. We'll get the whole story on what's up. So, the Republicans, the Democrats fight back. They try to do that. Well, for example, Lyft. Dodge City, Kansas, right? Or it has the iconic western town. It has now become 60% Hispanic. So, of course, the Republicans who control Kansas and control Dodge City, ironically, which says something about how we need to get active, they decided that even though there's 27,000 people in town, and many of the Hispanic people do not have automobiles. They're at the lower end of the economic spectrum. They depend on public transportation. They decided to move the single polling place, the one place in town where you could vote, way outside town, miles outside town, more than a mile away from the nearest bus stop. So Lyft, you know, the ride-hailing company, they compete with Uber. Lyft, along with Voto Latino, is offering Dodge City voters a free ride to the polling place. So, you know, using the hashtag Dodge City, hashtag Kansas, they tweeted Dodge City, Kansas is a Latinx majority city that has had its only polling location moved outside of city limits without access to public transportation. So we're partnering with Lyft to provide rides to the polls. This is from Voto Latino. And it's also being sponsored by Johnny Walker. I'm assuming that that's the liquor company. Remarkable. But anyhow, what I was saying is the way we'll know, and the way that we can look back at elections going back to 2000. Now, prior to 2000 is by looking at the redshift. Prior to 2000, there was no real consequential redshift. And prior to 2000, we had really a rapid way of knowing. I mean, the news media all knew who had won the election long before the polls closed because of exit polling. The news media, you know, were reporting, they were calling elections within minutes of the elections in many cases because of exit polling. The media, by the way, do this in Europe routinely. Every country in Europe, they do exit polling, and because they all vote on paper, and so it takes a day or two to count all the ballots, they release the exit polls the night of the election. Everybody celebrates, everybody goes home, and then the real vote comes in, and it's always the same. It's rarely even more than a tenth of a point off. But in 2000, you had this massive voter suppression effort in Florida where Jeb Bush knocked 90,000 African Americans off the polls so that his brother could win the election in Florida and the Supreme Court could hand him the U.S. presidency. And it wasn't just Florida where it was being done, but that was the most conspicuous. That's the most well-known. But it was really, let's try this out. Let's see how this works. If we can suppress the vote of black people, will that get Republicans elected? And sure enough, it did. And it did in several states. But the exit polling companies, they were reporting that Al Gore won Florida. And they had egg on their face. I mean, it was horribly embarrassing. They had to, quote, correct their numbers. Remember that, 2000? In 2002, it got even worse. In 2004, it got so bad that the major companies in the exit polling business went bankrupt. They went out of business. And so a consortium of news media got together and said, well, we'll do the exit polling. And in 2006 and 2008, again, they were so far off. And nobody ever knew why. They assumed there was something wrong with the exit polls. If we can, but what's wrong is that people are going into the voting booth or going into the polling place. They're told your name is not on the list, but here's a provisional ballot. You can still vote. So they vote for the Democrat typically, and turn in the provisional ballot, not knowing it'll never be counted. And then when they walk out, they tell the exit pollsters that they voted for the Democrat. And so the exit polls, this is why we have 3 points, 5 points, 7 points, what's called redshift, where the exit polls are saying the Democrat won, but there's been a 3, 5, 7 point shift to the Republican in terms of the actual vote count, in quotes. So we need to be looking for this on election night because this will tell us how effective the Republican voting suppression efforts have been.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Up next, your calls on the news of the day, on the bombs, on the election, on Trump, on Khashoggi, on progressive activists, whatever you'd like. We'll be right back. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back by Thom Hartmann. This is from the introduction titled The Battle to Save Democracy. Excuse me. On September 2nd, 2009, the transnational pharmaceutical giant Pfizer pled guilty to multiple criminal felonies. It had been marketing drugs in a way that may well have led to the deaths of people and that definitely led physicians to prescribe and patients to use pharmaceuticals in a way that for which they were not intended. Because Pfizer is a corporation, a legal abstraction, really, it couldn't go to jail like fraudster Bernie Madoff or killer John Dillinger. Instead, it paid a $1.2 billion criminal fine to the U.S. government, the biggest in history, as well as an additional $1 billion in civil penalties. The total settlement was more than $2.3 billion, another record. None of Pfizer's executives, decision makers, stockholders, owners, or employees saw even 5 minutes of the inside of a police station or a jail. Most Americans don't even know about this huge and massive crime, nor do they know that the criminal never spent a day in jail. But they do know that in the autumn of 2004, Martha Stewart was convicted of lying to investigators about her sale of stock in another pharmaceutical company. Her crime cost nobody their life, but she famously was escorted off to a women's prison. Had she been a corporation instead of a human being, odds are there would not have even been an investigation. Yet over the past century, and particularly the past 40 years, corporations have repeatedly asserted that they are, in fact, persons, and therefore eligible for the human rights protections of the Bill of Rights. In 2009, the right-wing advocacy group Citizens United argued before the Supreme Court that they had the First Amendment right to free speech and to influence elections through the production and distribution of a slasher documentary designed to destroy Hillary Clinton's ability to win the Democratic nomination. Some political observers assert that they did this in part because they believed that a black man whose first name sounded like Osama and whose middle name was Hussein could never, ever possibly win against a Republican, no matter how poor a candidate they put up. In that, they were following on a 2003 case before the Supreme Court in which Nike claimed it had the First Amendment right to lie in its corporate marketing, a variation of the First Amendment right of free speech. Corporations haven't limited their grasp to the First Amendment. Pretty much any and virtually every amendment that could be used to further corporate interests has been fair game. As you'll learn in this book, in previous decades, a chemical company took to the Supreme Court a case asserting its Fourth Amendment right to privacy from the EPA, snooping into its illegal chemical discharges. Other corporations have asserted Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination, as well as asserting the 14th Amendment, passed after the Civil War to strip slavery from the Constitution, asserting that it protects their right against discrimination by a local community that doesn't want them building a toxic waste incinerator, commercial hog operations, or superstores. If this trend continues, it's probably just a matter of time before a corporation claims the Second Amendment right to bear arms anywhere, anytime, and your credit card company's bill collector shows up at your home with a sidearm. This legal situation is not only bizarre, but also quite the opposite of the visions for this country held by the founders of the nation and the framers of the Constitution. They were sufficiently worried about corporate power that they didn't even include in the Constitution the word corporation, intending instead that the states should tightly regulate corporate behavior, which the states did quite well until just after the Civil War. The American Revolution, you'll learn in this book, was in fact provoked by the misbehavior of a British corporation. Our nation was founded in an anti-corporate power fury. The most significant and oft-quoted precedent of the turning point of corporate power in America began just after the Civil War. It rested on a constitutional amendment successfully written and passed by a group of radical Republicans after the Civil War. That's what they called themselves, radical Republicans, to take slavery out of the Constitution. Given that today's Republican Party has, largely since the robber baron era of the 1880s, been the party of big business and the very rich, it's a bit difficult for some people to get their minds around the possibility that the Republican Party started out as a reform party, that for nearly 70 years, from before Abraham Lincoln until just after Theodore Roosevelt left the party to start a third party, had a strong progressive wing. But the Republican Party did. Although Lincoln was, by today's standards, a moderate Republican, he was still anti-slavery, pro-middle class, and pro-labor. In fact, he famously said labor is superior to capital because it precedes capital. Nobody has wealth until somebody makes something. And he was the first president both to use the word strike in public and to actually stop police and private armies from killing and beating strikers. And just like in today's mainstream Democratic Party, where there's a progressive minority that always seems to be pushing the edges, in the Republican Party of the 1800s, there was a very, even by today's standards, progressive faction. The radical Republicans were a splinter group that emerged in a big way from the Republican Party at its founding in 1854. And just after the Civil War in 1866, they gained a majority among Republicans in the House of Representatives, where they had a powerful influence until the faction disintegrated in the 1870s during the presidency of Ulysses S. Grant. They supported the absolute right of freed slaves to vote and participate in government. It goes on from there. Unequal protection, corporate power. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Give me the phone, sure. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And sure, if you can put Greg on the phone line here, I'll pick him up. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Greg Palast is with us, our old buddy. At gregpalast.com is the website. You can tweet him at Greg_Palast. And he has been doing just amazing work suing Republican secretaries of state who have been suppressing the vote. I was just ranting a few minutes ago, Greg, about how if we're still doing exit polling, and frankly, I don't know where it's being done, who's doing it, or what states are going to do it this year, but exit polling has been probably our most reliable indicator in the past of how successful voter suppression efforts have been, because people go in, they're given a provisional ballot, they don't realize it doesn't get counted, they tell the exit pollster that they voted, and then, you know, the exit pollsters say, well, you know, Al Gore won Florida by 2 points, but then the actual numbers come out, and oh no, it's dead heat, you know, and that's because 90,000 people African Americans got thrown off the voting rolls in Florida by Jeb Bush. That kind of thing, that we're going to see that kind of red shift in state after state. Do you know what the state of exit polling is before we get to Brian Kemp and everything else that's going on?
Terrible. What's happened is after the exit pollsters caught the Bush family in stealing the 2000 election, their haul before Congress, then they found out, then the exit pollsters said, John Kerry won Ohio, won the presidency. Oops, they got hauled in again. So now they do something called conforming. Are you ready for this? They do their exit polls, and then when they get the official numbers, they start loading in the official numbers and throwing away their own actual data, which is the one thing that we have to try to figure out whether they stole the election, you know, for sure. You know, the United States State Department uses exit polls as the gold standard for determining whether an election was stolen. That's Ukraine.
Oh, we overturned the election in Ukraine, for God's sake, because of exit polls.
Exactly. And so now we find that Hillary won the sufficient states to win the Electoral College in 2016. And you had it exactly right. By the way, I know what you said because I do listen to the Thom Hartmann Program on KPFK.
God bless you. And by the way, KPFK is in a fund drive, as many of our Pacifica stations are right now. And if you can pitch in, if you can help out, if you can toss some money their way, please do so. And Greg and I are going to be on day after tomorrow. We're going to be at a fundraiser in San Pedro at the Warner Grand Theater. At 3:30 in the afternoon, and it's a fundraiser for KPFK, and kpfk.org is the website. So anyhow, back to exit polls.
Yes, so we have this horrible thing called conforming, where they simply take the official word and the official bogus numbers, and you're absolutely right on why this is happening. We're talking in the last election officially, 2.7 million provisional ballots reported. That's probably about half the number actually cast. 2 million of those were never counted. And that's the official word from the federal government. So we have this massive kind of back-of-the-bus voting system called provisional ballots, which is pretty much for voters of color. And I just came back from Georgia, and you are going to see provisional ballots in Georgia like you can't believe coming in. Plus, you're right, you have absentee ballots being thrown in the garbage. They use in Georgia a system, Brian Kemp, Brian Kemp, he's the Secretary of State. He's the guy who runs the election, counts the ballots, and he's running for governor at the same time, avoiding the usual inconvenience that secretaries of state who run for higher office resign first so there's no conflict of interest. I mean, conflicts are us, that's his operations name.
Tongue in cheek, but yeah, I get that.
Excuse me.
So
fact check. Yeah, that was I made that up.
The Republicans have been caught warning donors about voting while black. Is that donors or voters? Do I have a typo here?
Donors. He was on a private call with. He thought private. So
who's he?
That is Brian Kemp, the Secretary of State, who is running against Stacey Abrams. He's the Republican. She's the Democrat, and as you should know by now, she'd be the first African-American female governor of the United States if they count all the ballots, at least from what the polling is showing. But so Kemp got on the phone and is scaring his donors into coughing up more money because he said, Stacey Abrams is basically beating the crap out of us on absentee ballots, people asking for absentee ballots in advance. Now, he has some tricks up his sleeve to make sure those ballots don't get to those voters, don't get counted, et cetera. But in the meantime, he's basically telling his donors, man, if they count these ballots, we lose. Send me money.
Wow. Whoa. So what is the state of things right now? I noticed on your website a couple days ago, and in fact, I wrote an op-ed about it that was picked up at Slate and Common Dreams and Alternet and whatnot, in which I quoted you, and I had multiple links to your website, that you have all these different state voter totals. At the time that I wrote the article on Sunday, I think it was, you had not put up a total for Nebraska, but you had the list. People could check it out.
Right.
What's the grand total? I mean, how many people do we know of so far that just in the last 6 months or so, or the last year, have been purged from the voting rolls, and in what states? And then, of course, the follow-up question will be, and what can you do if you show up and they say, oh, here's a provisional ballot, I can't find your name?
Well, number one, we have filed, and I say we, myself as a journalist, and then I'm joined by Reverend Jesse Jackson, other activists, NAACP, and in Georgia, the campaign, the Georgia Coalition for People's Agenda. That's Reverend Lowry's organization. So it's civil rights groups, and what we're doing is we're suing the states to get the names and addresses of people who have been purged, 26 states. We've got about 15 to comply, Colorado, Nebraska, Indiana, Illinois, and after we threatened to haul his behind into court in the last week of his campaign, Brian Kemp
in
Georgia has turned over the voter rolls. I did file a federal suit against him on Friday in Atlanta federal court because he's still stonewalling me on key information. And so that's so I'm still. But what we have found out is just in Georgia alone, we had 550,000 people purged from the voter rolls on grounds, they call it inactive. What that means is that they move them from inactive to canceled. If you wonder what that fancy term means, it means that they think that Brian Kemp has decided that you've moved from the state or moved from your county. And I would say so far we've gathered over 2 million names.
And the rationale, by the way, for that assertion is typically that you failed to vote in the last election.
You failed to vote, and then they send you a postcard. We call it the postcard trick.
Yeah, it's called it used to be called caging. There used to be, I mean, for 30 years there was a federal court order preventing the Republican Party from doing this.
But now they've got the court. So what they do is they mail you a letter. It looks like junk mail. In Illinois, 19 out of 20 people throw it in the garbage because it looks like junk mail. And then if you miss an election, they say, oh, that means that you've moved out of the state or you've left. And so you lose your vote. And so are you ready for this? 500,000 Georgians we know and have been given zero notice that they have been purged, that is, from the voter rolls, that is, their registrations are canceled. And I want to tell you what we did, Tom. I did something no other journalist has done. Number one, sue to get the actual names and addresses of each of these voters. I did something else. I hired about 4 major consulting firms whose total job, what they do is that they find out where you live. I hate to tell you this, but American Express knows where you are on Thursday at 2 p.m.
Right. Yeah, these are companies that sell marketing information to people who want to sell things to you, basically.
Right, and these are the number one consultants in the nation to the biggest companies, and they have special what they call address hygiene systems, and they can tell you with absolute certainty where people live.
I used to run a company that marketed with direct mail. This is a very sophisticated. I mean, it's these operations. So yeah, so these people know whether somebody still lives there or not. And they know it for sure because they've been engaging in commerce with these people, typically in the previous weeks or months. So they told you what?
Yeah, they have 200 databases, and we have a special contract with the post office as well, by the way. And using 200 databases and the post office latest data, they say with 96% certainty, they gave us the names and addresses of 340,134 Georgians who never left the state and never left their county, never moved out of their registration home where they originally registered to vote. 340,134. Overwhelmingly, these are voters of color. These are poor voters. These are students. It is not, so they literally will not know if they show up to vote, that they've been knocked off the voter rolls. They'll be given one of those provisional ballots, which will not be counted. You cannot count a ballot if you are not registered, says Brian Kemp. Even if he wrongly removed you from the voter rolls,
Right.
he's going to throw away your ballot and your provisional ballot. But however, you'll tell the exit pollster, oh, I voted, and then there'll be a difference. And when that difference is uncovered, the exit pollsters will, quote, conform the data to the official line.
Now, since the election of 2000, when this was really rolled out in a big way on behalf of George W. Bush by his brother Jeb in Florida, but it was done in numerous other states too, we have had election after election where the exit pollsters said the Democrats won, but the actual count says the Republicans won as a result of this voter suppression. It seems to me that had this happened to the Republican Party and been done by the Democratic Party, that starting in 2000, they would have been screaming bloody murder. It would have been absolute holy hell from the rafters. How are the scions? How are the wise elders of the Democratic Party responding to the research that you're doing and to what you're uncovering?
Well, there's one elder named Stacey Abrams who I've been talking to about this for 5 years. By the way, my lawsuit and investigation began before he even discussed running for governor. I didn't think he was running for governor. So I'm not trying to influence the election. I'm trying to get people back their votes and get the information. But she understands it, and so we have major African-American politicians understand exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
My problem is with the Democrats' white congressional caucus. For example, when I issued the purge list in Colorado, which was given to me by the Republican Secretary of State. His name is Wayne Williams.
In response to a lawsuit.
In response to my lawsuit.
Yeah, he wasn't being generous. He was forced to. Yeah, okay.
He was forced to give the names of the people he removed from the voter rolls, hundreds of thousands of Coloradans. And when I called him on it, he screamed bloody murder, held press conferences, attacked me. And the Democratic Party candidate's reaction was, he didn't like, or she didn't like what Greg Palast was saying because the Democratic candidate didn't want to be negative.
Oh, God.
We don't want to be negative. We don't want to talk about voters losing their votes. In Colorado, it's Hispanics and American natives. That's who's at risk in Colorado. So you ask, why should a state like Colorado, which should be blue to the core, given its demographics, why are Democrats losing Colorado? Because the Democratic Party is not protecting its voters of color. It's the sad and true story. Yeah.
And that's one state. Is that emblematic of what's happening all over? I mean, I'm surprised Tom Perez is not screaming about this in the rooftops. Can you imagine if Newt Gingrich was running the Republican Party? I mean, he's out there right now saying, "Oh yeah, the media deserved this." I mean, it's not. You could just imagine how the Republicans would play this if it's sad.
Well, when I uncovered the purge of tens of thousands of black voters in Florida, they were called felons. Their only crime was voting while black.
Right.
The head of the Democratic Party there was trying to get trying to get Democratic politicians to say something. They wouldn't. They're afraid to say that they are the protectors of black criminals, that they're protectors of illegal alien voters, et cetera. In other words, they're cowering from the Republican attacks. Remember, the Republicans' response to this is that they're preventing massive voter fraud.
Right.
As if, and again, that they're having people drive in from out of state. No, they've never left Georgia. These are Georgians, sir, in Mr. Kemp. So again, it's unfortunate there's a huge racial divide within the Democratic Party on this.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that we can do about that is elevate this to the status of issue. If all the Democrats listening to this program, for example, were to call their member of Congress at 202-224-3121, you have one member of the House, 2 senators, call all 3 of them and say, I want you, if they're talking to a Democrat, I want you to do everything you can to get the Democratic Party to raise holy hell about this voter suppression and this whole scam with the placebo ballot, the provisional ballots. Greg Palast, and of course, get over to Greg Palast's website, gregpalast.com, and check out his movie, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. Hang on just a second, Greg.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Greg, I'll see you day after tomorrow in San Pedro.
Yep, you got me. Okay.
KPFK.org. Looking forward to it. welcome back. Dion in Round Lake, Illinois. Hey, Dion, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Great. What's on your mind?
Yeah, with bomb scares yesterday, they were almost basically political assassinations attempts from the far right, possibly. Do you think what's next is the roundup of political activists and citizens if we don't get the right election results?
That has been going on since 2000. You could argue that that's been going on forever in American history, all the way back to the persecution of anti-war protesters and the Black Panthers in the 60s, and civil rights activists in the 1920s and the 1870s. I mean, that's been going on forever. But yeah, Dion, net bottom line is I am expecting things to get a whole lot worse before they get better. And in fact, that's going to be the theme of my next hour. And that's just what I see. I mean, it seems to me that the best metaphor for what's going on right now is the early stages of Kristallnacht, of the uprising by the white supremacists against minorities in ways that are being fanned and inflamed by the politicians of the day. So yeah, Dion, I think that we're going to see more and more of that. Gary in Arlington Heights, Illinois. Hey, Gary, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I'd like to disagree with you in part, okay?
Please.
It's not only the purging, okay? It is the voting machine.
Oh, I agree with you, Gary.
Okay?
Especially in Georgia. I agree.
Where there is no paper trail.
Right. That's why I said especially in Georgia. There's literally no paper trail. No receipt,
right.
No nothing.
Okay. 2004, Ohio, okay, where more people voted Republican in that county that lived in the total number of people that lived in that county.
Correct.
Okay.
In 2000 in Florida, in Volusia County, the vote for Al Gore actually went backwards as the day continued.
Another one. So it's this multiple pronged attack.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree.
That's why we haven't been able to sit there and say, okay, and if they gain 1% because of this and 1%, 2% because of that, okay.
And then you throw gerrymandering into the mix, and then you throw into the mix the fact that small states have 2 senators just like large states. And the Senate controls so many things, and you got the Republicans in the Senate represent fewer than 40% of Americans. I think it's like 37% of Americans, and yet they control the Senate. The Republicans in
the other week.
Go ahead.
I called you the other week, and I was saying to Rokan, okay, that's why after this election, I mean we have to win, but after this election, first order of business has to be to do what we haven't done since 1998 and get a handle on this election process.
Yep, I agree.
Okay,
we need Congress to pass legislation saying that there is a national right to vote. It would be ideal to amend the Constitution to say that, but that's probably not going to happen anytime in the near future. But we could start with actual legislation, and we need to start and we need to repass the Voting Rights Act so that the federal government can crack down on these states when they do exactly what Brian Kemp is doing in Georgia right now, suppressing the black vote. Gary, thank you. Amen. Amen. I'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, people who support our program there get, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thank you. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And this whole voter suppression effort is just breathtaking. And now we know that this is the principal reason that since 2000, we've had 2 Republican presidents who weren't actually elected by the majority of the people. We've got a Republican Senate that wasn't elected by the majority of the people. We've got a Republican House that wasn't elected by the majority of the people. And we call this a small d democracy? Really? David in Portland, Oregon, listening on X-Ray FM. Hey, David, what's up?
Hi, Tom. First time calling. I just wanted to point out to me, the Democrats don't want to actually fix the exit poll system because there were suspect exit polls in the Democratic primary 2016 against Bernie and Hillary, again with California using provisionary ballots to not count millions of Bernie's votes. But the Republican exit polls were completely fine. So this conglomerate of MSNBC, CNN, et cetera, stopped doing their exit polls halfway through the primary altogether because they couldn't really explain why Hillary's and Bernie's were off, but why the Republican circus with 16 candidates was completely within the
I have
normal...
seen reporting, David, and I can't attest to its veracity because I don't know the people who did the research, but I've seen some considerable reporting suggesting essentially what you're saying, that there was a purge of voters, Democratic voters, in some very progressive areas in California during just leading up to the primary.
Is a way of purging. What they did in California was they just changed people's voting locations. So then the people would go to the voting location they were used to going to for 4 years, and they taught the pollsters to just hand out provisionary ballots instead
provisional
of
ballots.
Help them find their location.
Yeah, maybe. And in fact, I'm hearing now that a lot of California voters are discovering that they've been removed from the voting rolls, and maybe it goes back to that, maybe it doesn't. But I'm telling you, David, this is not. I mean, that may have been done in some areas in California by some Democrats. This is not a systemic policy of the Democratic Party. It absolutely is not. And to the best of my knowledge, I mean, that might have happened. Like I said, I've seen some reporting on it. I don't know if it's conspiracy theory stuff or if it's real. But this is something that the Republicans have reliably relied on and have gone with since the late 1990s. So, we just have to acknowledge that. And this is why it's always red shift. I have not yet seen any blue shift, and neither have you. There has been not a single state where we saw that the election tabulator, the voting, the actual counted votes, the non-provisional ballot counted votes, the actual ballots counted, ended up having a higher percentage of Democratic voters than the exit polls. We have not seen that. And, that's a problem. We'll be back. We're going to talk about Kristallnacht right after the break. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills, through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. People who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Settlers, The Mythology of the White Proletariat, The True Story of the White Nation by J. Sakai, published by Morningstar Press in 1989. This is from Chapter 2, The Foundations of Settler Life. The life of European settlers and the class structure of their society was abnormal because it was dependent upon a foundation of conquest, genocide, and enslavement. The myth of the self-sufficient white settler family clearing the wilderness and supporting themselves through their own initiative and hard labor is a propaganda fabrication. It is the absolute characteristic of settler society to be parasitic, dependent upon the super-exploitation of oppressed peoples for its style of life. Never has Euro-American society completely supported itself. This is the decisive factor in the consciousness of all classes and strata of white society from 1600 to now. Settler society was raised up above the level of backward old Europe by a foundation of conquest. This conquest was a miracle drug for a Europe convulsed with the reaction of decaying feudalism and deadly capitalism. Shot into the veins of the Spanish feudal nation, for instance, the miracle drug of the New World conquest gave Spain the momentary power to overrun North Africa, Holland, and Italy before her historical incident waned. Like many such fixes for Euro-Americans, this conquest was addicting. It was habit-forming and rapidly indispensable, not only culturally, but in the mechanism of an oppressor society whose lifeblood was new conquest. We'll examine this later in the relationship of settlerism to imperialism. For now, it's enough to see that this conquest is a material act of great magnitude, an economic and social event as important as the emergence of the factory system or the exploitation of petroleum in the Middle East. We stress the obvious here because the Euro-American settlers have always made light of their invasion and occupation, although the conquered territory is the precondition for their whole society. Traditionally, European settler societies throw off the propaganda smoke screens that they didn't really conquer and dispossess other nations. They claim with false modesty that they merely moved into vacant territory. So the early English settlers depicted America as empty, a howling wilderness, unsettled, sparsely populated, just waiting with a vacant sign on the door for the first lucky civilization to walk in and claim it. Theodore Roosevelt wrote defensively in 1900, quote, "The settler and pioneer have at bottom had justice on their side. This great continent could not have been kept as nothing but a game preserve for squalid savages," end of quote. It is telling that this lie is precisely the same lie put forward by white Afrikaner settlers who claim that South Africa was literally totally uninhabited by any Africans when they arrived from Europe. To universal derision, these European settlers claim to be the only rightful historic inhabitants of South Africa. Or we can hear similar defenses put forward by the European settlers of Israel, who claim that much of the Palestinian land and buildings they occupy are rightfully theirs, since the Arabs had allegedly decided to voluntarily abandon it all during the 1948-49 war. Are these kinds of tales any less preposterous than those put forward by Euro-American settlers? America was spacious and sparsely populated only because the European invaders destroyed whole civilizations and killed off millions of Native Americans to get the land and profits they wanted. We all know that when the English arrived at Virginia, for example, they encountered an urban, village-dwelling society far more skilled than they were in the arts of medicine, agriculture, fishing, and government. This civilization was reflected in a chain of 300 Indian nations and peoples stretching from the Arctic Circle to the tip of South America, many of whom had highly developed societies.
There was, in fact, a greater population in these Indian nations in 1492 than in all of Western Europe. Recent scholarly estimates indicate that at the time of Columbus, there were 100 million Indians in the hemisphere, 10 million in North America, 25 million in Central Mexico, and an additional 65 million elsewhere in Central and South America. These numbers have long been concealed since they give rise to the logical question of what happened to this great mass of people. The European invaders, Spanish, Dutch, English, Portuguese, and French, simply killed off millions and millions to safeguard their conquest of the land and provide the disposable slave labor they needed to launch their new world. Conservative Western historical estimates show that the Spanish reduced, in quotes, the Indian population of their colonies from some 50 million to only 4 million by the end of the 17th century. And from the 10 million Indians who once inhabited North America, after 4 centuries of settler invasion and rule, there were in 1900 perhaps 200,000 to 300,000 surviving descendants in the United States. This was the very substantial down payment towards the continuing blood price that third world nations have to pay to sustain the Euro-American way of life. So when we hear that the settlers pushed out the Indians or forced the Indians to leave their traditional hunting grounds, we know that these are just code phrases to refer politely to the most barbaric genocide imaginable. It could well be the greatest crime in all of human history. Only here, the Adolf Eichmanns and Heinrich Himmlers had names like Benjamin Franklin and Andrew Jackson. The point is that genocide was not an accident, not an excess, not the unintended side effect of virile European growth. Genocide was the necessary and deliberate act of the capitalists and their settler shock troops. The book Settlers.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We now have, I mean, this is truly breathtaking when you consider it. In fact, it was well summarized over at the top of Democratic Underground with a graphic that says, after 3 solid years of constant, violent rhetoric against Democrats and the media, Trump reacts to the attempted assassination of 2 former Democratic presidents, a former Democratic vice president, a former Democratic secretary of state, a former Democratic attorney general, 2 sitting Democratic congresswomen, a former director of the CIA, employees of a mainstream news organization, the attempted assassination of all of these, and of 2 private citizens who have criticized him. And then they quote Trump, well, they only have themselves to blame, which is essentially what Newt Gingrich said this morning, too. Or yesterday afternoon, actually. It was reported this morning. I think that we need to put this in historical context. And this is, kind of moving beyond the conversation that we just had with Greg Palast about the vigorous voting suppression efforts that are being done all over the country, particularly, shockingly, in Colorado, for example. 500,000 people thrown off the voting rolls by the Republican Secretary of State. Virtually all of them, or the vast majority of them, Hispanics or Native Americans. But this is speaking to this demonization of Democrats and Jews, specifically George Soros. And how this is played out to the point now that some crazy has attempted to assassinate former presidents, a former vice president, former secretary of state, a former attorney general, and a sitting congresswoman. And there's a whole special thing about Maxine Waters that I'm going to get to in a few minutes. But step into the Wayback Machine with me to November 9th and November 10th of 1938. This was, well, in that fall, before November, in October of 1938, a young man by the name of Herschel Grispan. He was a 17-year-old ethnically Polish Jew who had been living in France for several years. This is from history.com, by the way, learned that the Nazis had exiled his parents to Poland from Hanover, Germany, where he had been born and where his family had lived for years. He got seriously angry with the Nazis and decided he was going to retaliate. So on November 7th, 1938, Herschel Grynspan, Grynszpan, a Jewish boy, 17 years old, shot Ernst von Roth, who was the German attaché. He was the German diplomat who was in Paris. And Roth died 2 days later from his wounds. That was on November 9th. On November 9th, Adolf Hitler attended the funeral, and Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi minister for public enlightenment, immediately whipped Germany into a frenzy, essentially. You know, sort of the way that Trump is doing now with the caravans coming. Oh my God, you know, we need to get the army out. We need to. And the result of that rage was a two-night, two-day killing and smashing spree by, quote, good Germans. This was not Hitler's military. This was not even just the brown shirts. The brown shirts were the Nazi equivalent of the Proud Boys, you know, the civilian, right-wing, racist, paramilitary organization, for lack of a better phrase. Nazi mobs torched or otherwise vandalized hundreds of synagogues throughout Germany and damaged, if not completely destroyed, burned to the ground thousands of Jewish homes, Jewish schools, Jewish-owned businesses, Jewish hospitals, and destroyed Jewish cemeteries. And they murdered over 100 people. And we don't have numbers on how many were severely injured, but it had to be in the thousands. And the next day, over these 2 days, they were just smashing everybody's windows. And these were, again, just mobs, like we saw in Charlottesville. Jews will not replace us. Just mobs. And smashed so many windows that it was referred to originally as the Night of the Broken Glass in English. Kristallnacht. Kristall, broken glass, night. So that's what happened on November 9th, 1938. After that, there was a guy in the U.S. government, his name in the U.S. State Department, his name was Breckinridge Long. He died in 1958, and he was working for FDR. And he was an open anti-Semite. He was worried about the Jewish conspiracy to run the world. And so he put into place a policy in the State Department that they weren't going to be granting visas to Jews fleeing Germany or German-controlled territories. And this was after December 7th, 41, when we were attacked in Pearl Harbor. This was after we were already at war with Germany. Now, Germany at that point was a year into their program of murdering their own people by, exporting them to these death camps in Holland and Poland. There was a young man by the name of Arthur Spanier. He was a young Jewish man. He was the librarian, the Hebraica librarian. There was the Hebrew librarian at the Prussian State University Library, and an instructor at the Hochschule für die Wissenschaft des Judentums, the Higher School for Jewish Studies, forgive my schlecht Deutsch, both located in Berlin, Germany. After Kristallnacht, he was sent to a concentration camp, but he got a job offer from the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, Ohio, who he had been working with and corresponding with while he was a librarian in Berlin. He applied for American visa, and because of the anti-Semitic policies of the guy in the State Department, it was turned down. He traveled to Rotterdam, the Netherlands, to try to flee the Germans, but he was trapped there in May of 1940. He was sent to Bergen-Belsen, where he was herded into a gas chamber along with a whole bunch of other people and killed This all tracks back to, now this was what I'm talking about here was 1944 when he was killed. But 1938, 6 years earlier, was the first major attack, Kristallnacht. And you say, oh, well, you know, it's that was all about Jews, and this isn't entirely about anti-Semitism. I refer you to Talia Lavin's piece in the Washington Post today. It's titled, Conspiracy Theories About Soros Aren't Just False, They're Anti-Semitic. And Talia writes, on October 5th, Donald Trump theorized on Twitter that Soros was behind the vocal protests against Brett Kavanaugh's appointment to the Supreme Court justice, stating that, quote, the very rude elevator screamers were paid for by Soros. Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida pointedly raised the question of whether George Soros was paying for the migrant caravan, including where they defecate. She writes, after Trump's Soros tweet about Kavanaugh, the neo-Nazi website The Daily Stormer echoed and surpassed Trump's assertion that anti-Kavanaugh dissent was a nefarious paid-for plot. Quote, this is from the Daily Stormer, a guy named Lee Rogers. It is impossible to deny that subversive anti-American Jews were the primary force involved in a sinister plot to destroy Kavanaugh. These Jews do not represent the interest of America. They represent the interest of their diabolical and evil race, first and foremost. Then on October 19th, Trump gives a speech in Missoula, Montana, in which he again says that the protesters are paid for by Soros. And over on 4chan, Trump named the immigration Jew. Naming the Jew is a phrase that these anti-Semites use by way of saying, we've outed some nefarious Jewish conspiracy. This is an old canard, she writes. The idea that Jews are malevolent fomenters of social dissent, agitators slyly funding and masterminding protests, seeking to undermine a white Christian social order. Tim McVeigh killed 168 people in 1995 when he blew up the Oklahoma City bombing. He did so because he read the Turner Diaries, and the Turner Diaries had phrases in them. This is a quote from the Turner Diaries. The unique historical role of the Jews is the ferment of decomposition of races and civilizations. Jews are plotting to manipulate and exploit the entire racial equality movement for their own ends. Your day is coming, Jews, your day is coming. And the main theory here is that all of the African Americans who are out protesting are doing so, and the Hispanics who are protesting, and the immigrants who are coming into this country, all these people of color are doing so because George Soros, the big rich Jew, is paying them to do it. And then Donald Trump shows up at his last rally and says, yes, I am a nationalist. And what do we get? David Duke, the next day, October 23rd, tweeting, Trump embraces nationalism in a massive jam-packed 99.9% white venue in Houston. Zionist journalists asked him if this is white nationalism. Of course, fundamentally it is. There's no ethnic or racial group in America more nationalist than white Americans, so what's the problem? Tweets David Duke, former leader of the Ku Klux Klan in, as I recall, Louisiana. Meanwhile, Newt Gingrich was caught on the street by TMZ, a reporter for TMZ, and said, hey, what do you think about this? Robert De Niro just got one of these things. Clinton, Obama, all these assassination attempts. Are you concerned? Gingrich says, I have faith in God. So then the reporter says, well, do you think that Trump's rhetoric had anything to do with this? And Gingrich says, well, you mean like Congressman Maxine Waters' comments saying that they should drive Republicans out of public, that kind? Or the former Attorney General Eric Holder saying they should kick Republicans when they're down? And so then they said, well, what about Trump's attacks on the media? Do you think that had anything to do with it? And Newt Gingrich says, and I quote, the mainstream media have often earned it. This is the exact same message that Joseph Goebbels was spreading on November 10th and 11th of 1938. It's astonishing, and we need to do something about this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I think step one is exposing it, and exposing it in its real historical context, as I hope I have just done. And welcome back. Cheryl in Mount Pulaski, Illinois, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Cheryl, what's on your mind?
Well, it's a little different than what you're saying, but I'm amazed that they never talk about the fact that, yes, these bombs are addressed to these important people, but it goes through a mailroom, it goes on a mail truck. All this time, it is exposing everybody, not just the Democrats, but the Trump people have just as good a chance to be blown up, because that bomb doesn't say when it's in transit it's only going to pick one particular party.
Right. It appears that, for what it's worth, and excellent point, Cheryl. It appears that the purpose for the timer was not to determine when the bomb would explode, that the bombs were designed to explode when the package was torn open, that the purpose of the timer was to make that, fuse is the wrong word, trigger, I guess would be the right word, of, that was attached to the package being opened, to make that active so that the bomber could carry these bombs around without fear they'd go off in his car or in his hands. And during the postal process, they wouldn't explode. And so, we don't know, and we probably won't for a few days, how much time those were set for, what the time span was on those timers. But the whole point was to keep them from blowing up at the mail. That's not to say they couldn't have, particularly if they were delayed by a day, because I'm guessing that one of these digital timers has a maximum timing period of 24 hours. And you wouldn't want to cut it too close. There's just, how that's going to work out, I don't know. But yeah, I think your point is well made. Cheryl, thank you.
The thing about it is, we are assuming this bomb maker is an expert. Perhaps he's not.
Yeah.
And if he's not, it didn't work, thankfully.
Yeah, amen.
Nobody should expect expertise from this kind of thing. So I just wanted everybody to remember that, everybody's
at risk. Yep, well said. Cheryl, I want to get one more call in here before the break. Thank you for that. Melody, watching in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Hey, Melody, what's up? Melody? You're on the air. No Melody. Okay.
Hello?
Whoop, there she goes. Hey, Melody.
Hi.
Got a quick one?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I agree with you, and thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm originally a New Yorker, so I think we do need to call it out, and I've been calling it out. I've been doing my civic duty. I've had a tough year. I lost my father to pancreatic stage 4 cancer, and I just recently lost my son to a murder.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And I've been an active citizen. I've been getting people involved, and I also wrote it early. But yes, I definitely agree with you that we do need to call it out, and I think that we can fix this as a people. And after 9/11, I remember us unifying as a country, coming together. And then it was a terrorist act from, of course, terrorists outside. But unfortunately, we have domestic terrorists going on today inside. Right. And we have to acknowledge it, and we have to call it out for what it is white extremism.
Yeah.
There's nothing supreme with that ideology.
Yeah, absolutely. It's white nationalism. It's what, Donald Trump, he didn't use the word white. He didn't have to. Every person in the room was white. He's white. When he said, I'm a nationalist, aren't we all national? Yeah, right. Melody, thank you. Very well said. We'll be back. Francis Causey is going to join us. You're going to love this. Stick around. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, people who support our program there get, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com
Facebook.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Back on the line with us is Frances Causey. Frances is the director of a new movie, The Long Shadow. The website is thelongshadowfilm.com. You can tweet her at fcausey, C-A-U-S-E-Y, or at longshadowdoc, as in documentary. Frances, welcome back to the program.
Tom, it's great to be back with you.
It's been a while since we talked. Your last one was, remind me of the name. I did the narration for it, as I recall. Heist, that's right.
American Dream.
Thank you. Who Stole the American Dream? I want to play just a little, it's 23 seconds, just a 23-second clip from your film, and then on the backside of that, you can tell us all about it. It's going to have to be fairly quick. We're running out of time here, but here's the clip.
One of the reasons why the United States is such an advanced country is because of not only slavery, but the slave trade. We know that slavery was financed from places like New York, Rhode Island, Newport, and Boston.
One of the reasons Wall Street was created in the first place was to finance the slave industry.
Frances, tell us about the movie. We have, with my apologies, we have about a minute and a half till we're going to hit a break.
Yeah, I mean, the film really is about the impact of Jim Crow and slavery on the country. We connect the dots to the present, Tom, and there's some, as you say about the film, there's just this unbelievable hidden history that's unknown to people that really casts a light on the evil that slavery did upon our country. And, you know, I felt like as a white person that somebody needed to step up and say, okay, we've had this terrible history, and we know that everybody knows in their guts that it impacts the present. And we explain the exact context for things like this bombing and the other context for the political, racialized environment that we see ourselves in today.
And it's a brilliant film. It's an absolutely, I couldn't stop watching. I started out thinking, I'll just dip into this. thelongshadowfilm.com. Is this going to be in theatrical distribution, or is it going to?
Yeah. Actually, you know, about 1% of docs get theatrical, and we did. And so the film opens tomorrow in New York City at Cinema Village on 12th Street, and runs for a week. And then we're in LA, November 23rd, runs for a week and points in between. But you can find our screenings and how to get the film in your town or your school at thelongshadowfilm.com. Just scroll down and reach out to us, and we'll make sure you see it.
Yeah, and let me encourage people to check this out. And Frances narrates this through her life, you know, growing up in the South, and I was just blown away. I think you've created a masterpiece here, Frances. And
Tom, thank you. It means a lot coming from you.
Oh no, it's absolutely sincere, and I wish you the very, very best with it. And maybe in a couple of weeks you can come back, and on a day that's a little less news heavy, we can talk about it a little more. If that's all right with you?
Great, I'd love that.
Okay, thanks. Frances Causey, she's the director of The Long Shadow. The website is thelongshadowfilm.com. Check it out. Thank you. Thank you, Frances. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this short break here at the bottom of the hour. Our book today is Can We All Be Feminists? It's a collection of essays edited by Jane Eric Udori. This first chapter, or first essay, is from Charlotte Shane. It's called No Wave Feminism. If you feel like feminism is failing you, you're not alone. I sometimes have the impression that I'm as thoroughly feminist as I am thoroughly human. The feminism is as intrinsic to my constitution as my skeleton is to my body. But in my 35 years, I've struggled with or outright rejected feminism on several occasions. First, as an ignorant adolescent, what do women need feminism for if they already got the vote? Then, as a sex worker who saw how regularly and even gleefully feminists stoked the public's long-standing antipathy toward professionally sexual women. And now, again, as someone moving even further into the far left,
who cannot abide the forms of feminism that embrace and are complicit with the worst aspects of liberalism. The more I learn about the intersecting oppressive forces that continue to shape the Western world, colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, xenophobia, and racism, and the network of cruel social machinery to which these systems give rise, incarceration, crippling debt, disenfranchisement, deportation, and so on, the less sense it makes to use gender as the primary lens through which to regard human-engineered suffering. Feminism doesn't feel like the sharpest weapon to wield against white supremacy or border policing, for instance, or even the best tool with which to approach basic civic concerns like vibrant schools. That's not because those issues don't impact women. Obviously, they directly and indirectly impact many. But they don't necessarily impact women more or in dramatically different ways than they do men. In other words, the most significant challenges these issues present aren't tethered to one's sex. And so prioritizing gender above other aspects of identity limits one's realm of ethical responses. Here's an example. American prisons often keep female prisoners shackled while they give birth. There are variations on the theme. Some women are shackled during labor, some are unshackled, but then shackled again almost immediately afterward. And almost all are shackled while heavily pregnant. There's some variation of what shackling entails, too. It can mean being cuffed at the wrists or at the ankles, or both, or cuffed to a hospital bed or chained at the waist. Articulating these details makes the sadism even starker. A class-action federal lawsuit in 2017 alleged more than 40 women at the Milwaukee County Jail suffered this horror. It was preceded by lawsuits in 2014 and 2016 against that same jail for similar practice. But the appalling practice is hardly confined to one city or one state. In 2015, New York prisons were found to be shackling prisoners in labor in spite of a state law that made it illegal to do so. And according to a 2016 report by the Prison Birth Project and Prisoners' Legal Services of Massachusetts, jails and prisons in Massachusetts were guilty of similar violations. Most feminists probably agree that this is a feminist issue. The topic accordingly receives coverage on feminist websites and sometimes in women's magazines. But does a feminist obligation to attend to the rights of the imprisoned extend only as far as pregnancy and labor? Or is it a feminist issue when a non-pregnant woman is shackled? Or when she is caged for years and exploited for her labor, denied face-to-face visits from loved ones, held captive in a compound in the name of, quote, justice? If the answer to these questions is yes, then it is also a feminist issue. Then is it also a feminist issue when men are shackled during various health emergencies, seizures, say? In 2014, a male inmate in Colorado died after undergoing several seizures while in restraints and receiving no medical treatment. Is it a feminist issue when incarcerated men are denied the right to visit with family or exploited for their labor? Is it a feminist issue when so many men are raped while in prison? Or does feminism's responsibility begin and end with gender-based mistreatment? The feminists hired by prominent media outlets often advocate for measures that would result in higher levels of incarceration. They write op-eds in favor of further criminalization around sex work and call for longer prison sentences for men convicted of assault, which we've known for decades is not necessarily synonymous with men who committed the crime. They also disturbingly relish the theater of sentencing, like that enacted by Judge Rosemary Aquilina, who told serial sexual abuser Larry Nassar that if she could, she would allow some or many people to do to him what he did to others. So sexual violation is an atrocity unless it happens to the right person. They capitalize on women's justified fear and anger around mistreatment by men to shore up the status quo, to suggest that our current problems are not the result of fundamentally unjust institutions, but rather institutions that are only incidentally sexist. That means that those same institutions could become less so with the right adjustments, like more draconian sentencing for crimes against women, or more female judges. But the prison system is racist and brutal by design, not by accident or mismanagement, just as the court system regularly fails the most vulnerable because it was built to protect the powerful. The challenge of the 21st century is not to demand equal opportunity to participate in the machinery of oppression, revolutionary thinker Angela Davis has written. Rather, it is to identify and dismantle those structures. Yet leveraging our existing legal system for criminalization remains the go-to strategy for most feminists when it comes to dealing with objectionable behavior. The book, Can We All Be Feminists?
Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. People who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Doing and support. This is interesting. Somebody emailed me or tweeted me, I'm forgetting which, in the last half hour or so, a piece from Nieman Lab, NIEMANLAB.org, and it's posted by Christine Schmidt. It's an AP story. 100, and it's from, you know, half a year ago. 174 days remain until the midterms. The 2016 election wasn't polling's shiniest moment, with many postmortems pointing to opinion polls misleading election forecasters and underestimating Trump's support. No, they were correctly measuring Democratic support for Hillary Clinton. What they didn't know is that those Democrats' votes wouldn't be counted because they would be giving provisional ballots. It goes on to say it didn't help that some polls were tied to news organizations that don't really have resources to support the work. It was, you know, quack, quack, quack. And so they're trying to figure out how to get better polls. You're never going to get better polls when people think that they voted and come out and tell your pollsters, yeah, I voted. I mean, you know, and it gets reported, you know, well, here's how many people said they voted for Al Gore in Florida in 2000. I don't know why it shows this 70,000 fewer people actually voted for him. Well, it's because they were thrown off the voting rolls. They voted provisional ballots. It's incredible. Dion in Joplin, Missouri. Hey, Dion, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I heard your discussion on Kristallnacht, and I thought that was fantastic. I think we really need to contextualize everything that's going on right now. But my question and my real problem is, how do we get people who don't believe in facts to understand facts, or more importantly, the people that are apathetic and just don't know? Not that they don't care, or just that they just don't know. How do we get them to see what's going on in a historical context and really be as concerned as I think people should be?
Well, the rant I opened the show with will be up on YouTube in a few hours as a standalone YouTube clip, and you know, you're welcome to share it with as many friends as you want. Most of what I was reading from was at history.org, their page on Kristallnacht, and you share that with people. You know, the simple fact of the matter is that while there is a good chunk of anti-Semitism in Trump and his white supremacists, and when you know, the last time I talked to David Duke on this program, and I won't have him back anymore as a consequence of how he responded, everything I tried to discuss with him, he turned into, you know, well, how many Jews run Hollywood? You know, these kind of questions, really, really gross anti-Semitic questions, and you know, tried to turn the tables on me. But my point is that there's a big chunk of anti-Semitism in here. But it wasn't just the Jews that Hitler was going after, and just like it's not just the Jews that Trump is going after. He's going after African Americans. Now, there were not people of color in Nazi Germany at the time. Now you've got the Turks in Germany who were brought in after the war to rebuild the country. They were called the Guest workers. Gastarbeiters is the German word for that. And now, sometimes 2, 3, 4 generations down,
Many of them still don't have German citizenship, and there's a whole issue around this. And a lot of the rage of the modern day Nazis in Germany, and I'm talking literally the people who are and the hard right political party in Germany that just acquired some seats in parliament, is against the Turks. It's not against the Jews, because they got no Jews left. Well, or very few. But what's happening here is it's against Hispanics, and it's against African Americans, and it's against Jews. It's a threefer. And I'm telling you, Dion, African Americans know what's going on. They know what I'm talking about. Hispanics are quickly figuring out what's going on and know what I'm talking about. And the one problem might be that many recent visitors to the United States or residents of the United States or even citizens of the United States who are Hispanic listen to Spanish language media or watch Spanish language television. And I don't know how this is being played out there. But I think that the only thing that we can do is spread the word as far and wide as possible and not allow this both sidesism, you know, this crap that you hear from time to time. Well, you know, there are radicals in the Democratic Party. Really? It's like Newt Gingrich said yesterday. You mean like when Eric Holder said when Republicans are down, you should kick them? Well, Holder was very, you know, he made it very clear. He was talking metaphorically. He was saying that, you know, when the Democrats, you know, or when the Republicans go low, you kick back, you fight back. That's what he was saying. And you know, Maxine Waters, and Dion, thank you for the call. Maxine Waters' comment that, you know, outing people in public, I think that was wildly exaggerated and taken out of context. And to the extent that it wasn't, she's walked it back or apologized for it. But it doesn't matter. The real reason that these guys are going after Maxine Waters is easy to find, and why it's being supported by the billionaires behind them. And in fact, I printed this whole thing out here today, and don't know where it went, but it's over at the website is the U.S. House Committee on Financial Services, Democrats, and it's under democrats-financialservices.house.gov. And you go to this main page, and there's these. You go to Maxine Waters' page. She's the ranking member. She will run this committee if the Democrats take the House of Representatives. You go to her page, and you look at the articles that she has published in the last year as the #2 congressperson running the House Committee on Financial Services. Right? You just look at the titles of her articles, and I will read them to you. This is from Democrats-financialservices.house.gov. Dems offer resolution establishing wealth gap as a national problem. Now, how do you think the billionaires like Mercer and Kochs and Adelson like that? At Yellen hearing, Waters seeks answers at the wealth gap. Another article. Another article. Financial Services Democrats challenge Republican views on inequality issues. Another article. Waters says GOP budget ignores inequality and the racial wealth gap in America. Another one. Maxine Waters calls for a focus on promoting growth and reducing income inequality in the United States. Another one. Waters discusses growing income inequality. And finally, the last one on the page, leading House Democrats speaks out on globalization, inequality, and reform of international financial institutions. These folks who are funding and financing the Republican Party hate Maxine Waters for these reasons, not because she's black or a Democrat. And so they're perfectly willing to fund this hatred of her that then Donald Trump takes, to his racist, anti-Semitic followers, and just puts it on steroids. Heidi in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Heidi, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Can you hear me?
Just fine, Heidi.
Okay. My father was a Jewish guy from the Bronx. It's a long story, but he was involved in denazification, and I was raised partly in Germany, part Jewish. And then later at a Jewish university, I went on to major in modern European history from World War I through World War II.
You are well informed, Heidi, both personally and professionally. Do you think, if I may interrupt your narrative here real quickly, and then you can get back to it, do you think that I'm engaging in hyperbole here? Am I exaggerating?
No, but I think it's 1934. It's more similar because what's going on is our rights.
Heidi? Heidi just vanished.
Oh, man. Heidi, I would love to hear what you have to say. I'm going to put you on hold. I don't know if you accidentally hit your pause button or whatever. And if you're still around at the top of the next hour, we'll pick you up. 44:55. I have 1 minute to the break here. Carol in Monessen, Pennsylvania. Hey, Carol, I know you can
Hi.
be succinct and to the point. What's up?
These are very troubling times. I'm with you. I believe he's going to invoke his vision or version of Kristallnacht. And I'm very concerned that this is going to hit the fan just about the time that the refugees hit the border. And I'm even concerned that we have an election. I just feel like all hell's about to break loose, and it's very frightening. What can we do to prepare ourselves?
I think we need to wake people up. That was the big, the thing in Germany, Italy, and Spain, and Chile, for that matter, although they perhaps had a little more warning because they'd seen that movie played before in South America, was that people were not well informed. They looked at what was going on and they said, well, this is terrible, but we don't know where it's going to lead. We now know where it leads in the most extreme case. And it may stop, many steps short of that. But I agree with you. I think this is probably more 1934 than 1938. But this is what we've got, Carol. And the best thing I think we can do about it is talk about it clearly and without exaggeration and without fear, but point it out. Carol, thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
In about 4 minutes, we'll be checking in with Bob Ney with Talk Media News to find out what's going on in the world. Stick around. And welcome back. Jerry in St. Peters, Missouri. Hey, Jerry, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, I was wondering if it's just my observation, but it doesn't seem as though the American Jewish population seems to support this administration. They host speakers. They're for the movement, which has been going on for a while, of the embassy.
You're talking about AIPAC and the right-wing Jewish, the Shelley Adelson faction, essentially, of the American Jewish community, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't get it. Certainly there were Jews in Germany, at least early on, who thought, it's not going to be that bad, and we can work with this guy, and we can manipulate this guy. It didn't work out that way. But the point that I was making, Jerry, isn't so much that this is about Jews and about anti-Semitism. That's the icing on the cake for Trump. It's really about hatred of brown people. It's, anti-Semitism is so 20th century. The 21st century hate is brown people from the Middle East, brown people from Central and South America, and dark-skinned people who were brought here as slaves starting in 1619. That is really what's going on. And I think that's, yeah, you've got, the whole AIPAC, Netanyahu, Trump axis going on. And I just have to scratch my head and look at it. Jerry, it's a good question. I don't know the answer. Reginald in Chicago. Hey, Reginald, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? Someone just stole my thunder. I just have a few short things. That's one thing I don't understand. Why is it that rich Jewish people in this country support the right? Because the right wants the right Nazis and skinheads. They want to kill them also.
Yeah. I don't know if any polling or anything has been done, Reginald, and I certainly don't, I'm not Jewish. I don't have, my own wired connections into the Jewish community or anything like that. But I'm guessing that the number of members of the number of Jews who are very wealthy and are very supportive of Donald Trump exclusively because of his Israel policies, or even not wealthy and supportive of him, is probably very, very small.
And that guy, Ben Shapiro, I mean, he's all fiscal rocker.
Yeah.
Also, there was a situation in Israel where a Jewish man stabbed an Ethiopian baby in the head in the train station. And all the people, the African people who were walking around, they were calling them niggers in Yiddish.
Yeah.
And
let's try not to use that word on the air, Reginald, please.
Okay. Well, okay, and then another thing. One last thing.
Mm-hmm.
when, you know, the people who run the diamond industry are mostly Jewish people. They get diamonds out of Africa, pennies on a dollar.
Yeah.
You know.
No, I get it, Reginald, that there are some grievances that African Americans hold against Jews, and that there are some stereotypes or in some cases, reasons for those grievances. But again, I don't want to make this show a forum for anti-Semitism, and although these are conversations that probably we should all have. But B, as I said, I don't think that anti-Semitism is at the core of what Donald Trump is selling right now. I think it's anti-black, anti-Hispanic, and anti-Arab hatred, racially based hatred, and misogyny, the hatred of women. And it's being bought by white men. And those are the consumers of this product overwhelmingly. Reginald, thanks for the call. We're going to check in with Bob Ney and Talk Media News right after this. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, people who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you. Welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do. Ellen Ratner's new book on the line with us. He's the author of Sideswiped, former Congressman Bob Ney. Bob, welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you, Tom.
So what's at the top of your hit parade by way of headlines and news?
Well, I have some news, but can I comment on the question about AIPAC and Israel?
Yeah, just for people who don't know what we're talking about, because we lose about half our audience during that break that you were listening to the conversation. This entire hour, I set it up with a story of Kristallnacht in Germany in 1938, and you know, I'm not saying that the bombs are the exact parallel to Kristallnacht, maybe closer to 1934, the early violence against Jewish stores, and I also read the op-ed. You know, about how the attacks on George Soros are not just because he's a Democrat. In fact, they're mostly because he's Jewish and the whole, you know, Jewish thing. And then during the break, I had an African-American caller who said, you know, but you've got wealthy Jews who support Donald Trump, you know, the whole Shelley Adelson thing and, you know, the diamond industry, blah, 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 blah. And I said, I don't want to get into, you know, anti-Semitism here. You know, there are issues, but, you know, the fact of the matter is that Trump's principal thing is not anti-Semitism. That's frosting on the cake. His principal thing is hatred of people with melanin in their skin.
Right. And thanks for saying that. I forgot about the breaks and things, so I would have just went into that cold. I just wanted to throw out just a couple things on that, if I could.
Sure.
77% of Israeli Jews will support President Trump's ideas for U.S.-Israeli relations and Palestinians. So, I mean, with U.S.-Israel relations, 34% of American Jews will support President Trump on that same issue. It is very lopsided.
So it's a minority. It's a very serious. It's a very substantial minority of. Yeah. Okay. That's interesting.
Very. And so
Thank
I
you,
just
Bob.
wanted to point that out. And also with AIPAC, that was something with Tom DeLay of Texas, who worked very hard to combine some people to try to get money out of the American-Israeli Political Action Committee. And I was there when I saw it happen. So
And into the Republican Party?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was a concentrated effort by Tom DeLay to do it. He focused on it. He made it a daily chore to do that.
And you were there and you saw it?
I was there. I was in the room. I heard it all.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you, Bob. So what's going on in the world?
Well, of course, the situation with the horrible situation with the bombs that have been sent, they seem to be at this point in time, at least, they are not sophisticated, but they seem to be from at least the same person or the same group.
Right.
Because they are dangerous but not sophisticated. Then people that I've talked to some people that are sort of bomb experts, and it's nothing coming from the government, but they seem to believe that they will be able to track down whoever person or, again, groups that were involved in this. It's become a horrific situation, of course.
Yeah.
And the president made a conciliatory statement, but then he went to Wisconsin last night and went right back to the national media, badgering and bashing.
Yeah, hate the media. Yep.
So he did that. The other thing is that have you talked about the president's cell phone yet today?
No, I have not.
Okay.
Go for it.
This one is, this is amazing.
Let me, if I may, Bob, just to put this in context, what the Republicans spent years harassing Hillary Clinton over and trying to prosecute her for, and millions of dollars trying to prosecute her for, was using a private email server in her home to conduct government business when she was Secretary of State, which it turns out she didn't do, but she did use it for private stuff. But and the whole thing was, that server isn't secure. It doesn't have government level security. It could be hacked, and therefore we should lock her up. It never was hacked, it turns out, but we should lock her up because it could have been hacked. Now, to Mr. Trump.
Well, I was going to actually make that conclusion and make that parallel because of all that was said, but there is also a part to this that is humorous, but it's sad. And there was a defense in the story, and I'll get to that. President Obama, when he became president, he loved his BlackBerry. We all knew that. He wanted to keep it. They said, you can't, and he didn't. He turned over his BlackBerry. Well, President Trump, we find out, did not turn over. He has two phones. One's a, quote, government phone, and the other is his personal phone. He didn't turn it over. He has used it. They are saying categorically, point blank, the Chinese have listened in, and not for secrets, but they have listened in to try to understand him, have psychologists look at it to try to see how they can manipulate him, how they can woo him, et cetera, which is very fascinating.
Right. They're probably teaching President Xi how to behave toward Trump the way Sean Hannity does every night when they have their conversations.
Right.
Here's how to get him to be your best friend.
Hire Sean Hannity to do it. So the part of this that is actually in the story that is amazing, Tom, is when the story says there wasn't concern about the president doing it because he doesn't read security briefings anyway. That's in the story.
In other words, Trump is so dumb and uninformed that he couldn't spill American secrets because we don't give any to him. But we are kind of bummed out that the Chinese are figuring out how he relates to people on a one-to-one basis so that they can suck up to him more effectively.
Right. Basically, yes. You summarized it better than I could have. And that's in the story. It's actually an amazing story. So he still continues to keep his cell phone. How he does that, why nobody is able to take that from him is, beyond.
Now, he tweeted out saying that story was wrong, but he didn't offer any evidence.
Right. Correct.
So. Amazing. Bob Ney with Talk Media News. His book is Sideswiped, and it's out in Kindle also. It's amazing. Bob, thanks so much for dropping by today.
Thank you, Tom.
Good talking with you. We'll be back. We'll continue this conversation. There's a little bit more, not just a little bit more, there's a lot more in the news. But this conversation, I think, is one that we need to carry on, so stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Years of strategy and struggle against the prison industrial complex. It's a collection of essays. This one is by David Gilbert on page 31, titled "The System Within the System, the Prison Industrial Complex and Imperialism." For those of us held behind locked gates within the walls and fences topped with razor wire, the corrections regime is the system that works tirelessly to impose total control over every aspect of our lives. Yet as ponderous and powerful as prisons are, they're only one part, a central girder, of a much bigger and more foreboding house of horrors, which can most accurately be named imperialism. The structural needs of the larger edifice set the specifications for the size and position of the girder. The strength of the girder helps determine how long the building itself will stand. We can't understand the explosion of imprisonment in the United States since 1971 without looking at an imperialism's urgent needs and goals of that period. By the same token, we can't develop an effective program around the prison industrial complex without grappling with the stresses and trends of the larger system of imperial rule. To be clear, before you take time to read this chapter, I don't offer any brilliant ideas on strategy. Those will most likely emerge from the organizing and activist efforts themselves. However, some of the concerns discussed may raise questions that go into forming strategy. I definitely look forward to learning from the dialogues that this generates on these issues. Imperialism may sound like the kind of rhetoric we want to avoid, but it's one word that needs to be rescued as the best way to name the system that rules over us. The basis of imperialism is the relentless quest for profits around the globe. Its most striking characteristic is the colossal and grotesque polarization of wealth. That polarization happens between nations, between the rich countries of the North and the impoverished ones of the global South, the impoverished countries of Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia, and at the same time within each country based on class, race, and gender. The poles of dazzling wealth and abject poverty are intimately linked, as the former results from the ruthless plunder of the latter. This system is built on and intensifies all the major forms of oppression: patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy, all of which are structurally central. At the same time, imperialism highlights the global character of the system in a way that explains why the most intense oppression and resistance have been in the South, and that also provides the context for why the liberation struggles of the various people of color have been in the forefront within the U.S. There's no way to capture what the system costs in human life and potential, the pain and loss for all of us. Close to 1 billion human beings suffer chronic hunger, while another 2 billion face nutritional deficiencies. 1 billion lack access to clean drinking water. Just looking at children under the age of 5, imperialism is a holocaust in progress. Over 9 million die every year from easily preventable causes associated with poverty. The price for future generations may be even more severe as the rapaciousness of this global frenzy for profits threatens the very ecological basis for sustaining human life on any scale on our planet. Since most people won't accept living in squalor amid plenty, imperialism entails both the most sophisticated and the most brutal forms of social control. Its most salient feature is war, war after war after war, mainly against the peoples of the South. The domestic front line of such repression is a truly violent and harmful prison industrial complex. Today, 2,300,000 people are held behind bars, about 7 times the number in 1971. That explosion was unprecedented, coming after a 70-year period when the rates of imprisonment had remained more or less constant. This dramatic change did not result from some sudden skyrocketing of criminal activity, but rather from a radical expansion of what was designated as a crime and a draconian increase in the punishments for those crimes. Such extreme measures were driven by considerations way beyond criminal justice and often at cross purposes to the proclaimed goal of public safety. These destructive changes were born from crisis, one much more severe and protracted than the periodic ups and downs of the business cycles that occur over a roughly 10-year period, but rather a situation that threatened the very survival of the system. Such structural crises occur because capitalism is by its nature unstable. The economy is vast and complicated, but the major decisions are made by a tiny corporate and financial elite, with each thinking only of his own profits. When a structural crisis develops, the long-term institutional arrangements that assured a reliable flow of profits and the rule of capital no longer function. One dramatic example was the Great Depression of the 1930s, followed by World War II. At the end of that period, a new set of international institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, were created. At the same time, a new deal was hammered out for the terms of the bargain between capital and labor within the U.S. Those arrangements worked well for capital until they broke down a generation later. That new structural crisis, which emerged between 1968 and 73, is the seedbed for the burgeoning of the prison-industrial complex and many related changes in U.S. history. The first and most obvious signs were political, as the resistance to imperialism crested in 1968. Abolition now. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. People who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Age of Discovery. Fascinating book.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, the third hour of our program. And, you know, the first hour of our show, we had Greg Palast on, and we were talking about all the voter suppression efforts and, how they have affected how they've essentially created this phenomena where the polling companies, the exit polling companies, all basically went out of business between 2000 and 2010 because all the exit polls were so badly skewed. The exit polls showed Democrats winning race after race after race, but the actual vote tabulators said, no, Republicans won. And, you know, a lot of us thought, oh, my God, this is proof that the voting machines are rigged. Well, you may have that. In fact, there have been a few places where that's been actually identified. Volusia County, Florida in 2000, the vote total for Al Gore actually, as the afternoon proceeded, started going down instead of up. It worked. And, in the 2002 election in Alabama, you had Don Siegelman won that election. And then overnight, his opponent, Bob Riley, the Republican, gained somehow mysteriously 15,000 votes in one particular county where one particular vote counting tabulator was being run by one particular Republican operative in the middle of the night, all alone in the building. And he discovered there were 15,000 people who voted for Democrats down ticket, but not for Don Siegelman, the governor. They voted for the Republican for governor, just mysteriously. Nobody else in the state, but just in this one particular town. So anyhow, that was our first hour. Our second hour was the whole history of Kristallnacht. This is in case you just tuned in. Our second hour, the whole history of Kristallnacht and a discussion of where are we at in this cycle of violence, whether it's state-sponsored violence or whether it's the state-encouraged violence of right-wing racist thugs, racist and anti-Semitic thugs. Where are we at in that? And in this hour, and I'm going to pick up Heidi's call in just a minute here. She tried to call in the last hour to tell us about, her experience with this. But in this hour, I want to add to that who Donald Trump really is and what kind of a scam he and his daughter and his sons have been running for years. It appears that most of the genuine scam-like behavior comes after Donald Trump was bankrupt to the point that he was literally $1 billion in the hole. And that he maybe never really climbed out of that.
that he got large investments from foreign autocrats and oligarchs who helped bail him out. A lot from Russia, but a lot from other places around the world. He got a massive bank loan from the bank that where the son of Justice Kennedy, who just resigned, where the son of Justice Kennedy worked, Deutsche Bank. No American bank would loan him money, so he had to go to a German bank. And that was apparently not enough. I mean, his father had recently died. Although he's still getting money from his father's estate, and he has avoided paying apparently about $500 million in taxes. We know now from this New York Times report 2 weeks ago that Donald Trump is a tax cheat, that you and I have been subsidizing his lifestyle all these years to the tune of literally hundreds of millions of dollars, not millions, not even hundreds of millions of dollars, which is why, of course, he's not releasing his tax returns. But now we find that in business, he's actually a fraud. And this is from ProPublica. ProPublica has done this extraordinary 8-month investigation along with the WNYC, the news station there in New York City. And Heather Vogel writes this up on their website at features.propublica.org. This is an 8th-month investigation. The Trump family, I would call them the Trump crime family, helped mislead investors and buyers and profited handsomely from it. Patterns of deceptive practices occurred in a dozen deals across the globe, they write, or Heather Vogel writes over on ProPublica.com. One common pattern visible in more than half of those transactions was a tendency to misstate, I would say lie, key sales numbers. For example, Ivanka Trump gave false sales figures for projects in Mexico's Baja California, in Panama City, Panama, in Toronto, Canada, and in New York City's Soho neighborhood. These states weren't just legendary Trump hype. They misled potential buyers about the viability of the developments. And I'll tell you, this is a little, like a 20-page study here. I'm not going to go into enormous detail on it, but basically what they do is they'd go to these people and they'd say, it's 90% sold out. You better get an apartment or a condo while you still can, when in fact they hadn't sold any units at all, right? Or they would say, yeah, we own 50% of it, so don't worry, it's solid, and we got all the financing we need. Would you like to buy a unit? When in fact they didn't have the financing, they were financing it with the money from people who were buying units based on these false promises. And then in the case of Soho and Panama City and Baja California and several others, the Trump projects went bankrupt. They went up belly up, and the Trumps kept the money. The Trumps, again, from this article, the Trumps often made money even when projects failed, and when they tanked, the Trumps simply ignored their prior claims of close involvement, denied any responsibility, and walked away. And here is where this happened. In the Dominican Republic, Donald Trump claimed that he had $365 million in sales for this project. But according to a 2009 project audit, Trump reported he had $290 million in sales. The project was never built. Fort Lauderdale. In 2006, he announced that the hotel condo that he was going to build was already sold out. This is April 2006. In fact, by July of 2006, according to bank records that came out of a lawsuit, only 62% of the units had been sold. And as a result, they went into foreclosure. They declared bankruptcy and Trump's name was removed. In Las Vegas, he told the Associated Press in 2005 that his condos were sold out. That was 2005. 6 years later, in 2011, only a quarter of the units had been sold. Donald Trump and his family had been lying all the time. Panama. Ivanka Trump said, it's a 1,000-unit building. We've sold over 90% of it. She told this to a newspaper in 2008. As of 3 months later, 79% were pre-sold, and it went bankrupt, and Trump's name was removed. In Soho, in 2008, Ivanka told reporters that 60% of the units are sold. The reality, a Trump partner's affidavit revealed that 15% had been sold. As a result, it went bankrupt. In each one of these cases, the Trumps walked away with a lot of the money. In Tampa, Donald Trump told the Wall Street Journal in 2007, the building is sold out. The reality, the developers failed to sell even the minimum 70% of units, which was what was necessary to pay for the construction. And so, again, it went bust. It was never built. In Toronto, at a 2009 interview, Ivanka referred to the property as virtually sold out. The reality, 24.8% of the units have been sold, according to a 2016 bankruptcy filing by the developers. Again, the result, Trump walks away with the cash, the thing goes bankrupt, the Trump name is removed. In Baja, Trump claimed that he was a developer, a partner, and an equity owner. These are examples of this. More than 50 buyers claimed Ivanka told them that the Trump organization was the developer on a 2007 sales event. Over 50 people testified to this, according to a lawsuit quoted by Univision. They were, of course, lied to by Ivanka Trump. In the Dominican Republic, Trump was quoted as saying in a 2007 press release, "I am excited to be building Trump at Cap Cana." She wasn't actually building it. The Trump organization was not building it. Oh, this was Donald Trump who said that. He wasn't building it. He wasn't the builder. He was just licensing his name. In Fort Lauderdale, he called the tower and hotel my latest development. In the Republic of Georgia, in Panama, in Tampa, in Waikiki, every single case, they lied. These guys are not just tax cheats, they're grifters. We've got grifters running the White House. Amazing. Heidi in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Heidi, we were talking, you were going to tell us about your experiences with Germany and your thoughts on the parallels that I was drawing in the last hour. You're on the air.
Yeah, well, to recap, my father was a Jewish guy from the Bronx who was a native German speaker. He was involved in denazification and later became a multilingual intelligence officer during the Cold War, so that I was raised in Germany. And then I went on at a Jewish university to major in history, focusing on World War I through World War II. And you had said that you felt that what's going on now is Kristallnacht, but I feel like it's more like 1933 to 1934 when civil rights were just beginning to be abridged. Mm-hmm. And the bombings this week, or bomb threats this week, they kind of remind me of when the parliament was burned down in 1933.
The Reichstag fire. Yeah.
But also, I'm a white woman, very fair, dirty blonde hair, blue eyes, middle-aged, little plump, totally non-threatening person, and school teacher. And it's interesting. I was at, just as an example of civil rights being abridged. I have a broken foot. I'm going to nursing school so that I can immigrate to Canada. So I was at the library doing my homework, and I had my foot on a chair. And I wasn't allowed to have my foot on a chair. I wasn't allowed a reasonable accommodation. So finally the cops came and they hassled me and blah, 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 blah. So I had to, I actually tried to commit, civil disobedience. And, just as a matter of principle, I mean, this was ridiculous, a reasonable accommodation for a broken foot.
Yeah.
But, the police officer, I have a 7-year-old son and a 17-year-old daughter, and he threatened if I didn't get off the ground, he would put my 7-year-old son into CPS custody. So, I eventually left. But, as far as immigrating to Canada, my maternal grandmother was born and raised on a reserve in northern Alberta. And I tried immigrating, actually 14 years ago. All that you needed to immigrate then, they had a point system. And I had enough points because I had a professional degree, a master's degree in education. I'd worked as a professional, as a teacher, and I could bring $10,000 in the country for me and $2,000 for each child.
That's changed now. We only have 10 seconds left, Heidi.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, it's changed now because too many Americans were applying.
Right.
So they sent all the Americans things back. So now I'm going the nursing school route.
So now you've got so you're going the nursing school route so that you'll be wanted by Canada, right?
Right.
Remarkable, remarkable. Heidi, thank you for the call, and thank you for sharing your story with us. I think that your timeline is probably accurate. I think this is early 30s, not late 30s, but it's the 30s in Germany that we're seeing. Heidi, thank you. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll pick up your calls after this break. It's coming up on 19 minutes past the hour.
And welcome back. Deaver in Montgomery Creek, California, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Deaver, what's on your mind today? Deaver? You're on the air? No, apparently not. You got to listen to your phone, not your TV. Cynthia in Salem, Virginia. Hey, Cynthia, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I was just calling. I don't think people realize that on cable television, they do a lot of movies on Nazi Germany for quite a while. And they even showed, what was it, 1984. They even showed a movie on that. So I'm trying to put one times 1 + 1 equals 2. So I think it's sending a message.
You think that some of these documentaries about the horrors of Nazi Germany are actually encouraging American Nazis?
No, I think it's just an alert. It's like an alert to people.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think
and, you know, and that's trying.
Go ahead, Cynthia. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying, I just think it's an alert, and I'm just trying to put people on alert. You have to wake up.
Yep, I think so too.
You know, and then, you know, in my family, you know, some of my friends and stuff say, well, you know, you grew up under Jim Crow, so that's the way you're going to be. I said, no, it's here again, but it has an Esquire by its name.
Yeah, that's Joe Madison's famous line. It's now James Crow, ESQ. And Joe is so spot on about that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I just want to say thank you. I appreciate all you do. I am a supporter, going to be a supporter, and just let them take it out monthly.
Okay. Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you for your support of free speech, and thanks for the call. It was very nice to hear from you and to meet you here on the phone. Thank you. Let's see here. Lyle in Youngtown, Arizona. Hey, Lyle, what's up?
Hello, Tom. It's great to talk to you again. We have a really great discussion going on today, and I just had to jump in on this. As you were talking about Trump and his family, you know, the Trump crime family, as you put it, there's a documentary that just came out on October 7th. It's called The Family Business, Trump and Taxes. The New York Times actually did this with embedded cameras. And they went in and interviewed all these people that were involved with that property scam with all the apartments and how they managed to
it was the Soho one.
Off.
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, but going back to an earlier discussion, you had mentioned that people in during the Nazi German time were not well informed. There was one journalist and historian. His name was Fritz Gerlich. He had a newspaper. I think it was a weekly. It was called The Straight Path. Now his paper was really hated by the Nazi, the National Socialist Party.
He was a German.
Yes, he was. Yeah, and so he had this newspaper, The Straight Path. I think it was called Der Gradweg in German. So anyway, he opposed communism and National Socialism. And in 1932, his circulation of the weekly was over 40,000 readers. When the Nazis seized power in 1933, Gerlich was arrested on March 9th of 33 and held at Dachau, where he was killed on the night of the Long Knives. So there were people that were trying to inform the German people of what was going on there with that National Socialist
And good on
Party.
them. Lyle, thanks for that story. I'll have to do a little research on Fritz Gerlich. That sounds fascinating. Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. People who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com
Facebook.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Back, Thom Hartmann here with you and Lewis in Milwaukee. Hey, Lewis, it says you want to disagree with me. What's up?
Yeah, I got to get one of your books and read them because you really paint a good story. I don't know if you write as well as my favorite author, Louis L'Amour, but on the radio you add things up pretty well. But the thing is, as you're talking about Trump being anti-Semitic and stuff, what about the fact that Clinton, Bush, Obama didn't follow through with the promise to move our embassy to Jerusalem, and Trump did? I mean,
there was never a promise made to do that, Lewis. In fact,
I disagree.
When was the promise made? By whom?
By Clinton, Bush, and Obama.
It was always contingent. It was after we have. See, this was the amazingly stupid thing that Trump did. Is we had this contingency basically. We had a little bit of leverage over Israel to say we've got something you really want, which is moving the embassy to Jerusalem. In exchange for that, we want you to at least ease up on the Palestinians. Reduce the misery in Gaza, which is being run basically like an open-air prison camp. Stop the illegal settlements that are proliferating on land that is literally on a month-by-month basis being stolen from Palestinians. Dial it back, please. If you guys can come to some sort of rapprochement, if you can work things out with the Palestinians, and this is, Jimmy Carter worked very, very hard on this and won a Nobel Peace Prize for it, and Menachem Begin, God bless him. I mean, he worked so hard on this, and Anwar Sadat, and they made that treaty happen. And the next step was going to be, okay, we've got peace between Israel and Egypt. Now let's get peace between Israel and the Palestinians. And when that happens, then we can move our embassy to Jerusalem. And that has not happened. And so, you've got Kushner going over, Kushner who literally, Netanyahu says he used to sleep on the couch in Kushner's house when Kushner was a little kid. I mean, these guys are like good buddies going way back. And you would think that Kushner could have said, what am I going to get for this? But no, it was just a giant giveaway. And I think it was, frankly, for Shelley Adelson's millions. Shelley Adelson has been pouring tens of millions of dollars into the Republican Party and into the Trump efforts. That's just my personal conspiracy theory. Or it could be that, Jared is that, I don't know, in debt, emotionally in debt, perhaps, to the Netanyahu family. But we didn't get anything for this, Lewis. The world didn't get anything for this.
Why shouldn't we get anything?
Because they're behaving in a way that we have always said. Republicans and Democrats, George Bush and Barack Obama, and all the way back Reagan, Jimmy Carter, I mean, literally all the way back to Nixon, we have said, clean this up, and we will support you, and here's how we'll support you. Lewis, thanks for the call.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of your calls after the break here at the bottom of the hour. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Our book today is Us Versus Them, The Failure of Globalism by Ian Bremmer. This is from Chapter 1, titled Winners and Losers. It's time for a local revolution, the candidate told the roaring crowd. Countries are no longer nations, but markets. Borders are erased. Everyone can come to our country, and this has cut our salaries and our social protections. This dilutes our cultural identity. Marine Le Pen's 4 sentences capture every important element of the anxiety rising across the Western world. The borders are open and the foreigners are coming. They'll steal your job. They will cost you your pension and your health care by bankrupting your system. They will pollute your culture. Some of them are killers. Le Pen fell short in her bid to become France's president in 2017, but her message remains compelling for the 21st century politics of us versus them.
But this is not a story about Marine Le Pen or Donald J. Trump or any of the other populist powerhouses who have emerged in Europe and the United States in recent years. Spin the camera toward the furious crowd. There's the real story. It's not the messenger that drives this movement. It's the fears, often, if not always, justified, of ordinary people. Fears of lost jobs, surging waves of strangers, vanishing national identities, and the incomprehensible public violence associated with terrorism. It's the growing doubt among citizens that government can protect them, provide them with opportunities for a better life, and help them remain the masters of their fate. As of December 2015, just 6% of people in the United States, 4% in Germany, 4% in Britain, and 3% in France believe the world is getting better. The pessimistic majority suspects that those with power, money, and influence care more about their cosmopolitan world than they do about their fellow citizens. Many citizens of these countries now believe that globalization works for the favored few, but not for them. And they have a point. Globalization, the cross-border flow of ideas, information, money, people, goods, and services, has resulted in an interconnected world where national leaders have increasingly limited ability to protect the lives and livelihoods of their citizens. In the digital age, borders no longer mean what citizens think they mean. In some ways, they barely exist. Globalism, the belief that the interdependence that created globalization is a good thing, is indeed the ideology of the elite. Political leaders of the wealthy West have been globalism's biggest advocates, building a system that has propelled ideas, information, people, money, goods, and services across borders at a speed and on a scale without precedent in human history. Sure, more than 1 billion people have risen from poverty in recent decades, and economies and markets have come a long way from the financial crisis. But along with new opportunities come serious vulnerabilities, and the refusal of the global elite to acknowledge the downsides of the new interdependence confirms the suspicions of those losing their sense of security and standard of living that elites in New York and Paris have more in common with elites in Rome and San Francisco than with their discarded countrymen in Tulsa, Turin, Tuscaloosa, and Toulon. The globalists gutted the American working class and created a middle class in Asia, former White House strategist Steve Bannon told The Hollywood Reporter a few days after Donald Trump's 2016 election victory. The issue is now about Americans looking not to get effed over, end of quote. In the United States, the jobs that once lifted generations of Americans into the middle class and kept them there for life are vanishing. Crime and drug addiction are rising. While 87% of Chinese and 74% of Indians told pollsters in 2017 that they believe their country is moving in the right direction, only 43% of Americans said the same thing. In Europe, the European Commission and the unelected bureaucrats who enforce its rules have legislated for its 28 member nations without understanding their very needs. In recent years, they've failed to halt a debt crisis that has forced many Europeans to accept lower wages, higher prices, later retirement, less generous pensions, and an uncertain future, all while telling them that they must bail out foreign countries that have spent their way into debt. In the migrant crisis, globalist European leaders insisted that all EU members must accept Muslim refugees in numbers determined in Brussels, and barricades and a spike in nationalism were the result. I'm defining nationalism here as one form of us versus them intended to rally members of one nation against those of other nations. Were the wave of populist nationalism sweeping the United States and Europe only signs of globalism's failure, it would be bad enough. But there's a larger crisis coming. Many of the storms creating turmoil in the U.S. and Europe, particularly technological change in the workplace, broader awareness of income inequality, are now headed across borders and into the developing world, where governments and institutions are not ready. Developing countries are especially vulnerable because the institutions that create stability in developing countries are not as sturdy, and social safety nets aren't nearly as strong as in the United States and the European Union. They face an even bigger gap between rich and poor, and the reality that new technologies will kill large numbers of jobs that lifted expectations for a better life will be much harder to manage. In short, just as the financial crisis had a cascading effect through financial markets and real economies around the world, so the sources of anger convulsing Europe and America will send shockwaves through dozens of other countries. Some will absorb these shocks, some of them won't. As poorer people in developing countries become more aware of what they're missing or losing, many will pick up rocks. The book, Us versus Them by Ian Bremmer. All aboard. It's a once-in-a-lifetime luxury Alaskan cruise on the Regent Seven Seas Mariner, July 24th, 2019. For more information, Keen Luxury Travel, 800-856-1155. And did I mention we'll be getting active on board with special events with yours truly, me and Louise, as we visit Ketchikan, Juneau, Skagway, Sitka, Hubbard Glacier, and Anchorage.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And just a couple I wanted to share with you. By the way, this is the 35th or 36th anniversary? 35th. Ronald Reagan wanted to have a little war after Maggie Thatcher had her little war in the Falklands, and her popularity spiked. And so he was like, I need to have a little war. And where can I have a little war? Oh, there's some American students at a medical school in Grenada. Let's invade Grenada and save them because Maurice Bishop, the socialist leader of Grenada, is a socialist. God forbid. This is the anniversary of that. We're going to be talking more about that next week, so, hang on to that. An Oregonian. This is so sad. This guy, his name is Patrick Beadle. He's 46 years old, B-E-A-D-L-E. African-American. He was actually born in Jamaica. He's a Rastafarian. He has chronic pain in both of his knees from years of playing college basketball. So here in Oregon, he got a medical marijuana license, and he had some of his medical marijuana with him when he was driving through Mississippi. He wanted to stop at the home of B.B. King and pay his respects. And he got stopped by the police. And he was arrested for having pot in his car. And in July, an all-white jury took all of 25 minutes to convict Beadle, who is black. And on Monday of this week, he was sentenced to 8 years without the possibility of parole. An Oregonian traveling with his medical marijuana. 8 years in prison without the possibility of parole. This guy, he's 46, did I say? He'll be in his mid-50s by the time he gets out of jail. This is just, and this is how America's most racist Keebler elf wants all of America to be. Our esteemed Attorney General Jeff Sessions, Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III. This is how he wants it to be. Meanwhile, Janet Yellen is sounding the alarm over plunging loan standards. This is a little scary. These are actual quotes. This is in the Financial Times. Actual quotes from Janet Yellen. When I see what is happening politically with lobbying and the pushback on regulations and the priorities of some of the regulators, I am really concerned we're on the verge of forgetting about the financial crisis and the need for stronger regulation. To totally undermine these institutions, she's talking about Trump criticizing the Fed, to totally undermine these institutions that are assets to the U.S. and the globe is worrisome. She added, if we have a downturn in the economy, there are a lot of firms that will go bankrupt because of this debt. She's talking about all this corporate debt. In fact, back up a little bit. She says, I am most worried about the systemic risks associated with the $1.3 trillion market for leveraged loans. These are corporate loans of low loan quality. She said there's been a huge deterioration in standards. Covenants have been loosened in leveraged lending. There are a lot of weaknesses in the system, and instead of looking to remedy these weaknesses, I feel things have turned in a very deregulatory direction. When Janet Yellen is warning you to look out, you ought to look out. And finally, Martha El-Bashira went for a walk near her home in northern Georgia last week. She was 87 years old. She was carrying a kitchen knife and a plastic bag because she was looking for dandelions. Yes, she wanted to make a dandelion salad. But the police saw her and said, holy cow, a black woman with a knife in her hand, and they tasered this 87-year-old woman who was out looking for dandelions in the park across from her house. It's amazing. Steve in Malibu, California. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind? Steve, listening on TuneIn? Okay, Steve's on line 6, sure, if you want to check that out. Rob in Chico, California. Hey, Rob, what's up?
Tom, you argue that Trump's an anti-Semite.
No, I argue that Trump is using anti-Semitism and his followers to satisfy, to make happy his anti-Semitic followers. I'm not saying. I mean, Trump is the grandfather of Jewish kids. His daughter converted to Judaism. His son-in-law is Jewish, Orthodox at that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So Trump is not an anti-Semite in your opinion?
I don't know if he is or he is not, but I do know that the Trump administration, that what he has been doing in his speeches and through their actions has been a huge dog whistle to the anti-Semitic community. My main point, though, and I'll make it again, Rob, is that anti-Semitism, and again, I refer you, if you have any doubts or questions about this, Rob, read the op-ed in today's Washington Post about George Soros. It should be right on the front page of the electronic edition, online edition. My main point is that Trump is following the fascist playbook, whether it's Duterte in the Philippines, going against Muslims and drug users, or whether it was Hitler in Germany going against Jews, or whether it is Mussolini in Italy going against communists. He is using the fascist playbook by identifying a specific group of people and saying they are not us. Even though they live in our country, even though they are citizens, they are not us. They are the other. And as the other, we should suppress their ability to vote. We should restrict their activities. We should demonize them. We should hold them separate from us. And we need to hold the reins of power. And in the case of the United States, Trump is saying this about Muslims. He's saying this about South and Central Americans. And he is saying this about African Americans. All three, by the way, people who tend to have skin much darker than Donald Trump's, even with his orange goo on. That's what I'm saying. And the anti-Semitism is just icing on the cake, and it's why David Duke, exuberantly tweeted, after Trump called himself a nationalist. Yes, Trump has, white nationalism. And the Daily Stormer, literally the Nazi website, is running, pieces about how wonderful it is that Trump has finally come out against the international Jewish conspiracy and stuff like that. That's what I'm talking about. Stephen in Muncie, New York. Hey, Stephen, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for the lead-in, because this is something that not a lot of people are talking about. And I'm curious, and I want your opinion. See, we have things like Rise Above movement, and we have the Proud Boys, and we have all of these American Nazis, whom I consider these all to be domestic terrorist groups. Okay? Now, here's my question.
The Southern Poverty Law Center, by the way, I believe agrees with you, or at least calls them hate groups.
Okay, well, how could they not? That doesn't surprise me. But this is what I want to say. Okay, so if the United States government, once the United States government designates you as a domestic terrorist organization, they can go after everything, especially with provisions under the Patriot Act, which a lot of people aren't familiar with. And they can go after everything. They can go after your finance. They can go after your infrastructure. They can go after all, your computer, stuff. So this is what I'm going to say. The real deep state, listen to me, all you people who think that Donald Trump isn't an anti-Semite. The real deep state is the part of the government with sympathies that are sympathetic to these groups and their ideas, okay, who refuse to do nothing about it, that reach into the upper levels of the United States.
Stephen, the real deep state is the permanent bureaucracy, and it's not evil, and it's not monolithic, and it's not part of it overlooking things and part of it hating things, and or it is rather. It's as diverse as the American people. But I think we need to acknowledge that the deep state is a framing phrase that that it kind of parallels the Jewish conspiracy thing. There's this group that actually secretly controls everything. I'm not willing to go there, but I do agree with you that our government, and particularly the FBI, have been very reluctant to identify in ways that could be picked up by the Patriot Act, to identify right-wing terrorist groups as terrorist groups, whereas they've been enthusiastic, particularly historically, about naming left-wing or African-American, quote, terrorist groups as terrorist groups and bringing the full force of law against them. I'll give you that. Andy in Fort Worth, Texas. Hey, Andy, what's up?
Hey, I guess you got me logged in down there because I didn't introduce myself.
Yeah, you must have called before.
Yeah, I had. I just want to comment on two items. One is anti-Semitism, and the other is the Civil War, the so-called Civil War. The most anti-Semitic people in the world are the ones who practice the religion of Judaism. They only amount to 2% of all.
Yeah, Andy, I'm not even going to go there. I'm not going to let you go there either. Fred in Santa Maria and Sheriff, look out for. I really don't want any more anti-Semitic guests or callers, please. Fred in Santa Maria, California. Hey, Fred, what's up?
Hey, listen, I was just thinking out loud. I'm not a very educated man. I just graduated from I didn't graduate, but I just have a high school degree. And
you got more than me, Fred.
With all the smoke and mirror that Trump is doing, I just feel like this is just a diversion from the real problem, Saudi Arabia. I think they needed to get off of Saudi Arabia, so they need a diversion. It's just my simple mind just thinking that.
Well, I just saw, Michael Savage just tweeted that it's a diversion from the caravan of the Muslim or the immigrant hordes who have secret Muslims among them who are on their way to invade our country. I mean, I think it's a crazy guy. I mean, this is what I talked about yesterday, stochastic terrorism, that if you Fred, thanks for the call. If you go out and scare the hell out of people, and if you identify a group as an other, and if you constantly vilify that group and say that essentially they are worthy of persecution, right? Democrats are trying to destroy America. That's serious talk. I mean, it used to be Republicans would say, we have different visions of how America should work, but we all love our country. They don't talk like that anymore. And that's why you're getting this kind of stuff. And it is a form of terrorism.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
And it's a form of terrorism that's being practiced essentially institutionally by the Republican Party, by right-wing hate radio, and by Fox so-called news. And welcome back. Nathan in Hood River, Oregon. Hey, Nathan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I was going to talk about Palace, but you brought up the Kristallnacht stuff. My Uncle Dad was the lawyer representing Talisman, who was accused of burning down the Reichstag. And he wound up in the basement of the Industrial Art Museum, which they converted into basically a gulag or a prison. And so he then wound up on their way to.
He being your uncle, or
my uncle's dad?
Your uncle's dad. Okay, continue.
So it's a real interesting story about it. Just cut to the point. He wrote a book about it. My grandma set up a program to help Jews get into America, and so he got in on that program and wound up writing a book about how the Nazis just disassembled the whole parliamentary system of Germany, and it's called Might Makes Right, and it's just amazing how they're using the same tactics. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that. But what I was calling about was people need to start calling the representatives. I called Wyden this morning, and I told them not to be afraid of bringing up the subject of voter or election fraud, because you can't get a single prominent Democrat to even mention the word. We got Republicans owning the machines, they control the software, there's no audits. It's not how you vote, it's how you count them. And if we can't
That's not an argument, Nathan, that's going to wash with most of your institutional Democrats. But what they will accept is the argument that voter suppression is happening. And so that's where you need to be focusing. And it appears to me that the voter suppression is much more aggressive and much more successful, frankly, than any games that they might be playing with the voting machines.
How do we know that if we can't see what the real vote is, though?
The way that we know that is the red shift. The difference between the exit polls are still accurate. The difference between what the exit polls tell you and what the vote tabulators tell you, in states that still use paper, but are Republican controlled, there's red shift. In states that are entirely electronic or largely electronic voting machines but are democratically controlled, there's no red shift. So it looks like the red shift, that is the difference between what the people tell the exit pollsters, yes, I voted for Al Gore, versus what the election officials say, nope, there was no vote for Al Gore there. The difference between those two seems to be the people who got the provisional ballots that were never counted, rather than individual voting machines being messed with. Now, we know individual voting machines are hackable, and we know that they have been hacked. We saw this, and this wasn't voting machines, it was the tabulator in the case of Don Siegelman down in Alabama. In fact, there's a movie about it. And we know that it happened down in Florida, and Greg Palast has reported on it in Volusia County, where the votes for Al Gore were actually going backwards throughout the day on the electronic voting machines. But, you know, those are a few separate examples. But the big examples that we have, the big statewide examples we have, they all seem to tie most successfully, most accurately, if you're looking for cause and effect, back to voter suppression. So I would suggest that, you know, you're an Oregon resident, call Wyden back and say, you know, I'm really concerned about voter suppression. I don't see it happening here in Oregon. You know, we're the easiest state in the union to vote. But you need to bring this to the floor, and you need to be screaming about it. And you should call voter suppression election fraud. And Nathan, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills. Through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. People who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Jason in Chicago. Hey, Jason, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. So you were just speaking about voter suppression, and I want to piggyback on that. You know, I think that, you know, you're absolutely correct, and this is absolutely voter fraud, and our politicians should be screaming at the top.
Election fraud. Election
fraud. Yes, you're absolutely right. Election fraud. Excuse me, I misspoke. But I do agree with you. So I guess my solution would be, instead of if they make the rules and we have to follow them, right? So why are we not just saying, okay, well, you made the rules, let's get some people down there and help these people.
Democrats have spent literally millions of dollars doing this with registration efforts, get out the vote efforts, and now you've got, you know, Brian Kemp down in Georgia sitting on 57,000 voter registrations because, you know, we're not really sure they were all from black parts of the state. You've got other states. I'm spacing on the list. Greg Palast has the list over at gregpalast.com, where, you know, 30, 40, 50,000 people have registered to vote recently in Texas. census, it's several 100,000 people. And they're saying, you know, we just don't have the manpower to process these. Yeah, these people voted in plenty of time or registered in plenty of time, but they're just not going to be able to vote. I'm so sorry. You've got states like North Carolina that after they passed their voter ID law, they shut down licensed DMV offices in black neighborhoods, or radically cut back on the hours. You got places like in Kansas, where Dodge City, when it went 61% Hispanic, they literally moved the polling place out of town and a mile away from the nearest bus stop, so that people who didn't have cars couldn't get there. So the wealthy white part of town, no problem, they'll get out there to vote. But the poor Hispanics, no. I mean, these are structural things that no matter how hard you try to play by the rules, they are suppressing the vote. And it looks like, and this is the piece that I was reading from earlier, I think it was from the New York Times, shows that the predicted impact was 11%. The actual impact has been 9%, which says to me that we have been able to register, you know, we've been able to, by playing by the rules, we've been able to get an additional 2% of people in. But when you're 9% behind in a race that's decided by 2-3 points, you lose. Even 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 points. You know, if you're 9 points behind, you lose. So it just doesn't work. Jason, I get the argument. It's the argument that the Republicans make. Hey, we made the rules. Why don't you guys play by them? But, you know, the rules suck. The rules are designed to suppress the vote. Jim in Toledo, Ohio. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind? Jim?
Yeah, I listened to you like last week or the week before, and you pretty much shut down a guy because he called you out on, you know, speaking about Russia, you know, involved in the vote. And I'm like, they're low on the list of things that would have been part of the vote. The Electoral College, the big thing. I mean,
yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree with you. If the Russians had not, here's the reality, Jim. If the Russians had not intervened in the election, in all probability, Donald Trump wouldn't be president, because that effect has been measured and it was enough to swing it. But on the other hand, if Hillary Clinton had campaigned in the Midwestern states, probably Donald Trump wouldn't be president. If voter suppression had not occurred in those states, Donald Trump would certainly not be president. If what was the thing that you just it was voter suppression that you were talking about, right? I mean, we can look at dozens of different things that were all variables. If Donald Trump hadn't gotten $2 billion worth of free media, if Les Moonves at CBS hadn't made the conscious decision that making profit from running shows, stories about Donald Trump was more important than highlighting the crimes that Donald Trump had committed, Donald Trump wouldn't be president. If our media had been willing to actually call out what he was doing, Donald Trump wouldn't be president. I mean, yes, there's lots and lots of things. I don't get your outrage.
My outrage is that the one thing the Americans have that has always kept us strong is that we have a vote.
Right.
And when you bring up Russia being involved in that, they're very low on what happened.
I agree.
You had Comey coming out with the hacks that were...
Oh, yeah, that's another one. If Comey had never done his little song and dance around what's his name's, Carlos Danger's computer, Anthony Weiner's computer, you would, also Donald Trump would not be president. I agree with you on all those points, Jim. That said, none of those should have happened, right? We should have clean elections. We should have integrity in our elections, and we should not have foreign countries besting in our elections. It's real simple, and it should be easy to vote. It should be as easy to vote in every other state as it is here in Oregon. And that's our challenge. That's the work that we need to do. Jefferson Smith will be here tomorrow. I'll be back on Monday. Have a great afternoon and weekend. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Get out there and get active. Tag you're it. We'll see you soon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
From UN.